But when disaster strikes, he does the impossible. One moment of heroism, one act of strength. But why did he walk away without a word? Now, the world wants to know, who is he really? What's he hiding behind that quiet pride? What happens when a father's pride and his love for his son collide? When the truth is buried beneath fear, pain, and the weight of the world, will he learn to accept help? Or will it cost him everything he's been fighting for? The real test of a hero begins when the world stops watching. Are you ready for the truth? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as Jack Donnelly guided his mop across the community center's tile floor in long, methodical strokes. The evening sun filtered through the large windows, casting warm orange rays that made the wet floor gleam. The smell of pine cleaner hung in the air, familiar and almost comforting after his years of maintaining these halls. "Dad, look what I drew." Luke's voice echoed from the corner where Jack had set him up with his coloring books and crayons. The 6-year-old held up a colorful piece of paper, his face beaming with pride. Jack paused his work, leaning the mop against the wall. "Let me see that, buddy." He walked over, his work boots squeaking slightly on the damp floor. Luke's drawing showed 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands under what appeared to be a rainbow. Jack's throat tightened a little as he recognized their familiar silhouette. Just the 2 of them, as it had been for the past 3 years. "That's us," Luke explained, pointing with a crayon-stained finger. "And I made the sky extra colorful because you always say we should look for the bright side of things." Jack ruffled his son's hair, managing a smile despite the weight in his chest. "It's beautiful, Luke. We'll put it right up on the fridge when we get home." He glanced at his watch, still another hour of work to go. Returning to his mop, Jack watched Luke from the corner of his eye as the boy returned to his coloring. The child's tongue poked out slightly in concentration, a habit he'd inherited from his mother. The thought sent a familiar ache through Jack's heart, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of his work. The community center was quiet at this hour, most of the day's activities long finished. Jack preferred it this way. The solitude gave him space to think, to process the day's worries without anyone watching. The evening shift meant he could keep Luke with him, instead of paying for additional childcare, an expense he simply couldn't afford on his maintenance worker's salary. As he worked his way down the hallway, Jack's thoughts drifted to the stack of bills waiting at home. Luke's last checkup had cost more than expected, and the car needed repairs again. He'd have to pick up extra shifts somehow, maybe see if the grocery store needed night stock help. "Dad?" Luke's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Can we get ice cream on the way home?" Jack glanced at his wallet in his back pocket, knowing exactly what was in there. Just enough for gas to last until payday. "Not today, buddy. But maybe this weekend we can share that pint in the freezer. How's that sound?" Luke nodded, his disappointment visible but accepting. It struck Jack how his son had grown used to hearing "not today," how he'd learned not to push or whine like other kids his age might. Pride and guilt warred in Jack's chest at the thought. The sunset deepened outside, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. Jack moved to the windows, wiping down the glass with practiced efficiency. His reflection stared back at him, a tall man with broad shoulders, his dark hair slightly disheveled, his uniform showing signs of wear. He looked tired, he realized, though he tried to hide it from Luke. "Almost done, buddy," Jack called out, hearing Luke shuffling papers behind him. "Then we'll head home for dinner." "Can we have macaroni and cheese?" Luke asked hopefully. "Sure thing." Jack smiled, grateful they had a box left in the pantry. Simple meals, but Luke never complained. As he finished the windows, Jack's mind wandered to the families he saw coming through the community center during the day. Parents dropping off kids for activities, couples attending evening classes, all of them seeming so put together, so secure in their lives. He wondered if they ever lay awake at night worrying about grocery bills or doctor's visits. The mop made soft swishing sounds against the floor as Jack completed his final passes. Luke had started humming quietly to himself, a tune Jack recognized from his son's favorite cartoon show. The sound filled the empty hallway, making it feel less lonely somehow. Jack gathered his cleaning supplies, methodically checking off his mental list of evening tasks. Floor mopped, windows cleaned, trash emptied, bathroom sanitized. Everything in its place, just as he liked it. Control over these small things helped him feel less overwhelmed by the bigger challenges in his life. "Time to pack up, Luke," he called, wheeling the cleaning cart toward the supply closet. Luke began gathering his crayons, carefully placing them back in their box. He knew they couldn't afford to replace them if they broke. As Jack stored away the last of his supplies, movement outside caught his attention. Through the freshly cleaned windows, he watched a minivan pull into the parking lot. A family emerged, mother, father, and 2 children about Luke's age. They began unloading sports equipment, probably for evening practice. Jack observed them quietly as he collected Luke's backpack. The father helped his kids with their gear, laughing at something one of them said. It was a simple moment, ordinary really, but it made Jack wonder about the different shapes fatherhood took. Here he was, doing his best with just him and Luke, while others had partners to share the load. "Ready to go home, Dad?" Luke appeared at his side, drawing case clutched to his chest. Jack looked down at his son's upturned face, those innocent eyes that trusted him completely to make everything okay. "Yeah, buddy, let's head home." As they walked toward the exit, Jack's hand automatically finding Luke's smaller one, he couldn't help but glance once more at the family outside. The father was now helping adjust his daughter's soccer shin guards, his wife holding their son's hand. Different circumstances, different challenges, but the same core truth. Being a father meant showing up, doing whatever it took to give your kids their best chance. Jack squeezed Luke's hand gently as they stepped into the evening air. Tomorrow would bring its own set of worries. But for now, he had his son, a box of macaroni and cheese waiting at home, and the satisfaction of a job well done. Sometimes, he thought, that had to be enough. Jack set his mop against the wall and walked toward the play area where Luke sat with 2 other children. Their giggles drifted through the evening air, a welcome sound after another long day of work. The community center's playground wasn't much, just a small patch of grass with a few benches and a swing set. But it was Luke's favorite place to spend the afternoon while Jack finished his shift. "Hey, buddy," Jack called out, his work boots crunching against the gravel path. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ground, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees that lined the property. Luke looked up from his spot on the grass, his face lighting up. "Dad, come see what we're doing." He was sitting cross-legged with Tommy and Sarah, the center director's kids, arranging action figures in elaborate poses on the ground. Jack's tired muscles protested as he crouched down beside them. His hands were rough from years of manual labor, but he handled Luke's favorite Spider-Man figure with careful fingers. "What's the story this time?" "They're saving the city," Luke explained, his blue eyes sparkling with excitement. "Tommy's Iron Man is helping Spider-Man stop the bad guys." He pointed to a cluster of figures lying dramatically on their sides. Sarah, a year younger than Luke, with pigtails tied in pink ribbons, held up her Wonder Woman figure. "And she's the strongest one of all." Jack smiled, watching the children immerse themselves in their imaginary world. These moments made the long hours worth it. Seeing Luke happy, playing like any normal 6-year-old should. He checked his watch, noting it was almost time to head home and start dinner. A car engine rumbled to life nearby, drawing Jack's attention to the parking lot. A silver sedan was parked close to the low retaining wall that separated the playground from the slightly elevated parking area. The wall wasn't high, maybe 3 feet at most, but it had always made Jack nervous having cars parked so close to where the kids played. 5 more minutes, Luke," Jack said, standing up and stretching his back. He watched as a woman juggled her keys and a large bag of groceries, making her way to the driver's side of the silver sedan. Something about the way she had parked made him uneasy, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The children continued their game, oblivious to everything but their superhero adventure. Luke was in the middle of describing an elaborate battle scene when a metallic groan cut through the air. Jack's head snapped toward the sound. The silver sedan was moving, but no one was inside. The woman who had been there moments before was nowhere in sight. The car rolled backward, its wheels turning slowly at first, then picking up speed as it approached the retaining wall. "Luke!" Jack's voice tore from his throat. "Kids, move." Tommy and Sarah scrambled away, but Luke was still gathering his toys, his back to the danger. The car's rear wheels hit the wall with a sickening crunch. For a split second, it teetered on the edge, and then gravity took over. The world seemed to slow down as Jack watched in horror. The car tilted backward, its front end rising as it began to topple over the wall. Luke finally looked up, his eyes wide with fear, but it was too late. The vehicle crashed down, the sound of metal striking concrete drowning out everything else. Luke's scream pierced the air, then was suddenly cut short. The car had come to rest at an angle, its back end propped against the retaining wall, its front end pinning Luke to the ground. "No!" The word ripped from Jack's chest as he sprinted forward. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat, each beat accompanied by a single desperate thought. Not Luke. Please, not Luke. Tommy and Sarah's screams filled the air as other people began running toward the scene. But Jack didn't see any of them. His entire world had narrowed to the space beneath that car where his son lay trapped, and the overwhelming panic that threatened to paralyze him completely. He reached the car in seconds, though it felt like an eternity. Luke's small form was barely visible beneath the chassis, and the sight of his son's terrified face made Jack's blood run cold. Other voices were shouting now, calls for help, someone yelling about calling 911, but they seemed distant and unimportant. Jack dropped to his knees beside the car, his hands already reaching for the metal frame. His son needed him, and nothing else mattered. The panic in his chest transformed into something else, a surge of desperate determination that pushed everything else aside. "Hold on, Luke," he said, his voice shaking. "Dad's here. I'm going to get you out." He could hear Luke whimpering, the sound breaking his heart into 1,000 pieces. The car's weight pressed down, and Jack knew that every second counted. Without thinking about whether it was possible, without considering the physics or the danger or anything else, he planted his feet firmly on the ground and gripped the car's frame. There was no time for doubt, no time for fear. His son was trapped, and Jack would either find the strength to save him or die trying. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Jack stared at the horrifying scene before him. The silver sedan teetered on the edge of the low concrete wall, its front wheels spinning uselessly in the air. Beneath the massive weight of metal, Luke lay motionless, trapped from the waist down. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. His son's small body looked so fragile under the crushing weight of the vehicle. The world around him blurred, and all he could focus on was Luke's pale face pressed against the pavement. "Someone call 911? A woman's voice cut through the evening air, shrill with panic. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them away from the scene. Jack heard their frightened cries, but they seemed distant, as if coming from underwater. His entire universe had narrowed to his son and the car that threatened to take him away forever. "Luke!" Jack's voice came out as a strangled whisper. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside the car. The metal groaned ominously, shifting slightly. Luke didn't respond to his voice. "Don't move the car," someone shouted. "Wait for the emergency services." But Jack knew there wasn't time. He could see the car slowly sliding forward inch by inch. Each movement threatened to crush his son completely. The thought sent ice through his veins. "Hold on, buddy," Jack whispered, his hands trembling as they touched the cold metal of the car's frame. "Daddy's here." He positioned himself at the rear bumper, where Luke was pinned. The car's weight pressed down mercilessly, and Jack could hear the soft whimper that escaped his son's lips. That small sound of pain ignited something primal inside him. Jack planted his feet firmly on the ground, bending his knees. He wrapped his calloused hands around the bumper, feeling the rough metal dig into his palms. His muscles tensed as he prepared himself. "Sir, please wait." Someone touched his shoulder, trying to pull him back. "You'll hurt yourself." Jack shrugged off the hand. Nothing else mattered except getting his son out. He thought of Luke's first steps, his first words, the way he smiled every morning when Jack made him breakfast. He thought of the promise he'd made to his late wife to protect their boy no matter what. With a deep breath, Jack tightened his grip. His arms trembled as he began to lift, muscles straining against the impossible weight. The car didn't budge. Sweat beaded on his forehead, running down into his eyes. "Come on," he growled through clenched teeth. "Please." The crowd had fallen silent, watching in stunned disbelief as this ordinary-looking man in work clothes attempted something seemingly impossible. Jack ignored them all. He focused only on Luke's face, on the gentle rise and fall of his chest that proved he was still breathing. Jack's arms burned with effort. His back screamed in protest, but he kept pushing, kept lifting. He thought of Luke's artwork on their refrigerator, of bedtime stories and morning hugs, of small hands reaching for his larger ones when crossing the street. Something shifted inside him, like a dam breaking. Strength he didn't know he possessed flooded through his body. With a roar that came from somewhere deep in his soul, Jack lifted upward. The car moved. Inch by inch, the weight began to rise. Jack's entire body shook with the effort, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Not with Luke's life hanging in the balance. "Someone get him out!" Jack managed to shout, his voice strained and raw. Two people rushed forward as Jack held the car suspended above the ground. Their hands reached for Luke, carefully pulling him free from beneath the vehicle. Jack's arms trembled violently, but he held on until he heard someone say, "He's clear." Only then did Jack let the car drop back down with a heavy thud. He stumbled forward, his legs weak and shaking, but his focus remained entirely on Luke. Dropping to his knees beside his son, Jack quickly checked for signs of life. Luke's pulse beat steady beneath his fingers. Relief flooded through Jack's body, making him dizzy. Gently he began checking for injuries, remembering the basic first aid training he'd received years ago at work. "Luke," Jack called softly, cradling his son's head. "Can you hear me, buddy?" A small crowd had gathered around them, their voices a mix of amazement and concern. Jack heard someone mention how impossible it was for anyone to lift a car like that. Others whispered about calling news stations. But Jack tuned them all out, focusing solely on his son's face. He carefully ran his hands along Luke's arms and legs, checking for broken bones. There were scrapes on his son's palms and knees, and a small cut on his forehead, but nothing felt broken. Luke's breathing was steady, though he remained unconscious. "The ambulance is coming," a woman said, kneeling beside them. "They'll be here any minute." Jack nodded absently, keeping his hand on Luke's chest, feeling each precious heartbeat. His own body ached fiercely, but he barely noticed the pain. All that mattered was that his son was alive and breathing. In the distance, sirens wailed. Jack gathered Luke carefully in his arms, supporting his head and neck. His son felt so small, so fragile against his chest. Jack's throat tightened with emotion as he held him close, whispering words of comfort even though Luke couldn't hear them. "You're going to be okay," Jack murmured, his voice rough with unshed tears. "Daddy's got you. You're safe now." The crowd continued to stare in amazement, their phones recording the aftermath of what they'd just witnessed. But Jack remained focused solely on his son, monitoring his breathing, waiting for any sign of consciousness. The impossible feat he'd just accomplished didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the small boy in his arms. The sirens grew louder, and red and blue lights began to flash against the community center's walls. Jack held Luke closer, protecting him from the gathering crowd's curious gazes. His son's face remained peaceful, unaware of the extraordinary moment that had just occurred. The evening air filled with a cacophony of voices and the rhythmic wail of approaching sirens. Jack cradled Luke in his arms, the boy's body feeling lighter than ever against his chest. His son's eyes fluttered open, confusion painted across his young face. "Daddy?" Luke's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, buddy. I've got you." Jack's voice cracked as he held Luke closer, his heart still racing from what had just happened. The memory of lifting the car felt surreal, like something out of a dream or a nightmare. People pressed in around them, their phones held high, camera flashes creating a disorienting strobe effect in the growing darkness. Questions flew at Jack from all directions. "How did you do that?" "Sir, can we get your name? That was incredible. Are you some kind of superhero?" Jack ignored them all, focusing solely on Luke's breathing against his shoulder. The boy seemed dazed but alert, his small fingers clutching his father's work shirt. Red and blue lights painted the scene as an ambulance pulled up to the curb. Two paramedics jumped out, equipment in hand, moving quickly toward them through the crowd. "Sir, we need to check him," the female paramedic said, her voice firm but kind. "Please, let us make sure he's okay." Jack nodded, reluctantly letting the medical professionals examine Luke while still holding him. They checked his vitals, ran their hands along his limbs looking for injuries, and shined a light in his eyes. "He seems okay, but we should take him to the hospital for a full examination," the male paramedic advised. Better safe than sorry with these kinds of accidents. More people had gathered now, including a news van that had just pulled up. A reporter with perfectly styled hair was already making her way toward them, microphone extended. Sir, could we get a statement about what happened here?" Jack turned away, shielding Luke from the cameras. Without a word, he followed the paramedics to the ambulance. The crowd parted before them, still murmuring and recording with their phones. In the back of the ambulance, Jack held Luke's hand as the paramedics continued their examination. The doors closed, muffling the chaos outside, and Jack finally felt like he could breathe again. The ride to the hospital was quick, filled with gentle questions from the paramedics and quiet answers from Luke. Jack's mind kept replaying the moment, the impossible weight of the car, the surge of strength that had coursed through his body, the terror that had preceded it all. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what the paramedics had suspected. Luke was remarkably unharmed, with only minor bruising and scrapes. They wanted to keep him for observation, just to be safe, but assured Jack that his son would be fine. Hours later, they were finally cleared to go home. Jack carried an exhausted Luke to their small apartment, grateful for the quiet darkness that greeted them. He tucked his son into bed, watching as the boy's eyes grew heavy with sleep. "Daddy?" Luke mumbled, fighting to stay awake. "Yes, buddy? You're really strong." Jack's throat tightened. He smoothed Luke's hair back from his forehead. "Get some sleep, Luke. I love you." "Love you too, Daddy." After Luke drifted off, Jack made his way to their small living room. He couldn't sleep. His body still hummed with residual adrenaline. Settling onto their worn couch, he turned on the television, keeping the volume low. His stomach clenched as he saw himself on the screen. Someone had captured the whole thing on their phone. His sprint toward the car, the impossible lift, the way he'd walked away carrying Luke. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show what had happened. In an extraordinary display of strength, a local janitor lifted a car off his young son outside the community center this evening, the news anchor was saying. Witnesses described the act as superhuman and miraculous. They showed interviews with onlookers, all of them expressing amazement. The reporter who had tried to speak to him earlier appeared on screen, standing where it had all happened. "The humble hero disappeared before we could get his name," she said. "But sources tell us he works as a janitor at this community center." The question on everyone's mind tonight: who is this extraordinary man? And how did he find the strength to perform such an incredible feat? Jack clicked off the TV, plunging the room into darkness. He didn't want to be extraordinary. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to be Luke's father, to work his job, to live their quiet life without the world's eyes upon them. In the silence of their apartment, Jack could hear Luke's steady breathing from the other room. That sound had always been his anchor, his reminder of what mattered most. Tonight, it meant everything: proof that his son was safe, that they had survived the unthinkable. But as he sat there in the darkness, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet life had just become a lot more complicated. The thought of people searching for him, wanting to know his story, made his skin crawl. He had enough challenges being a single father without becoming some kind of local celebrity. From Luke's room came the soft rustle of sheets as the boy turned over in his sleep. Jack closed his eyes, listening to that peaceful sound. Whatever came next, he would handle it the way he handled everything else: quietly, steadily, focusing on what mattered most. His son was safe. That was all that mattered. The rest of the world could think what they wanted about the heroic janitor who lifted a car. He didn't need their attention or their praise. He just needed what he'd always had: his son, their home, and the strength to face each day as it came. The morning sun crept through the thin curtains of Jack's modest home, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. Outside, a small crowd had already gathered, reporters with their cameras and microphones, eager for a glimpse of the hero janitor. Jack stood at his kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, watching them with weary eyes. The phone rang again, the 5th time that morning. Jack didn't move to answer it. Instead, he took another sip of his coffee, the bitter taste matching his mood. Luke sat at the small kitchen table, spooning cereal into his mouth while drawing with his free hand. "Daddy, there are more people outside today," Luke said, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Are they still talking about what happened?" Jack set his cup down and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Yeah, buddy, they are." A sharp knock at the door made them both jump. "Mr. Donnelly," a voice called out. "Channel 5 News, we'd just like a few minutes of your time." Jack's jaw tightened. He'd lost count of how many reporters had shown up at their door in the past few days. The footage of him lifting the car had gone viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since. "When are they going away?" Luke asked, pushing his half-eaten cereal bowl aside. "Soon, I hope," Jack replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. He moved to the living room window and carefully adjusted the blinds to peek out. 3 news vans lined their small street now, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Another knock, more insistent this time. "Mr. Donnelly." The public wants to hear your story. How did you find the strength to lift that car? Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, another unknown number. He pulled it out and declined the call, adding it to the growing list of blocked numbers. The constant attention felt like a weight on his shoulders, heavier than any car he'd lifted. Luke appeared at his side, clutching his latest drawing.
I made this for you, Daddy. It's you being strong.
Jack took the paper, his throat tightening at the crude crayon sketch of himself holding what looked like a giant rectangle over his head. Stick figure people stood around him with their arms raised, like they were cheering. That's really good, buddy, Jack said softly, ruffling Luke's hair. But you know what? We need to talk about something important. They moved to the worn couch, the springs creaking under their weight. Outside, another reporter's voice called through the door, but Jack focused on his son's face, those innocent eyes that saw him not as a viral sensation, but simply as Dad. All these people out there, Jack began, choosing his words carefully. They think what happened was something special. And maybe it was. But that's not who we are, Luke. We're just regular people. You and me. Luke nodded, though confusion crossed his features.
But you saved me, Daddy. You're strong like Superman.
Jack's heart clenched. I'm not Superman, buddy. I'm just your dad. And what happened that day? It wasn't about being strong or being a hero. It was about being your father and protecting you. That's all. But everyone wants to talk to you about it, Luke persisted. Mrs. Thompson at school said you're famous now. Jack shook his head, pulling Luke closer to his side. Being famous isn't what matters. What matters is staying true to who we are. All these people outside, they want to make this into something bigger than it is. But we can't let that change us. The doorbell rang again, followed by more knocking. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the tension build in his shoulders. You know what makes someone special, Luke? Jack asked, opening his eyes to meet his son's gaze. It's not doing something that gets you on TV or makes people talk about you. It's being kind, working hard, and taking care of the people you love. That's what really matters. Luke seemed to consider this, his small face scrunched in thought.
Like how you take care of me?
Exactly like that, Jack said, managing a smile. And that's why we need to stay humble. Do you know what humble means? Luke shook his head. It means we don't let this attention make us think we're better than anyone else. We keep doing what we've always done, working hard, being kind, and taking care of each other. Can you help me with that? I can do that, Luke said solemnly, then brightened. Can we still have pizza for dinner tonight? Jack laughed, the sound feeling foreign in his throat after days of stress. Yeah, buddy, we can still have pizza. As Luke bounced off to finish his cereal, Jack remained on the couch, his smile fading. The voices outside continued their chorus, calling his name, asking for interviews, promising exposure and opportunities. Each call felt like a tug away from the life he'd built, the quiet existence he'd carved out for himself and Luke. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was his boss at the community center, probably calling about all the reporters gathering there too. Jack declined the call, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on him. He didn't want to be a hero or a viral sensation. He didn't want the attention or the opportunities people kept promising. He just wanted to be Luke's father, to work his job, to live their simple life. But as he watched Luke finishing his breakfast, humming happily to himself, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet life had already changed. The world had caught a glimpse of their story, and it wouldn't let go easily. The thought made his stomach churn. More knocking at the door. More voices calling his name. Jack closed his eyes and listened to the sound of his son's humming, trying to focus on what really mattered. They would get through this, he told himself. They would stay true to who they were, even if the whole world was watching. But deep inside, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, Jack felt lost. Lost between the man everyone wanted him to be and the father he needed to remain. Lost between the allure of opportunity and the comfort of obscurity. Lost between his pride in protecting his son and his discomfort with the attention it had brought. Luke's voice cut through his thoughts. Daddy, can we play cards? Jack opened his eyes, finding his son standing before him with a deck of cards in hand. In that moment, looking at Luke's hopeful face, Jack felt his resolve strengthen. This was what mattered. These simple moments, this simple life, Whatever came next, they would face it together, father and son, just as they always had. The phone's sharp ring cut through the morning silence once again. Jack stared at the receiver, his jaw tight. The number on the caller ID was different this time, not one of the usual reporters. After 6 rings, he finally picked it up. "Hello?" Jack's voice was guarded. "Mr. Donnelly? This is Thomas Patterson." The voice on the other end was smooth, polished. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Jack's fingers tightened around the phone. He knew the name. Everyone in town did. Thomas Patterson owned half the businesses downtown. "I saw what you did at the community center," Patterson continued, not waiting for Jack's response. "Remarkable. Simply remarkable. And I understand your boy was hurt?" "He's fine," Jack said flatly, watching through the window as Luke played with his toy trucks on their small patch of front lawn. The bruises from the accident were still visible on his son's arms. Medical bills can be quite overwhelming, especially for someone in your position. Patterson's voice dripped with what he probably thought was kindness. "I'd like to help. Consider it taken care of, all of it." Jack's free hand curled into a fist. In his position, the words echoed in his head, making his stomach turn. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Patterson. Please. Call me Tom. And I insist. It's no trouble at all. What you did was extraordinary. Let me do this for you and your boy." Jack watched as Luke crashed his trucks together, making explosion sounds. His son's laughter floated through the window, pure and unburdened. "I appreciate the offer, but we're managing just fine." "Managing?" Patterson's tone shifted slightly. "Mr. Donnelly, I've seen your situation. A single father, working as a janitor. Surely you want what's best for your son." The implied criticism made Jack's blood boil. He thought about the stack of medical bills on his kitchen table, the extra shifts he'd picked up, the way his back ached from working 16-hour days. But he also thought about his father's words, spoken so many years ago. "A man provides for his family. No handouts, no shortcuts." "What's best for my son," Jack said carefully, measuring each word, "is having a father who shows him how to stand on his own 2 feet. Pride is all well and good, Mr. Donnelly, but—" "Thank you for your offer." Jack cut him off, his voice firm. "But my answer is no." There was a long pause on the other end. When Patterson spoke again, the warmth had left his voice. "You're making a mistake. Think about your boy." "I am thinking about my boy. Goodbye, Mr. Patterson." Jack hung up before the businessman could respond. He stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter until his knuckles turned white. The medical bills seemed to stare at him from the table, their red paste due stamps like accusations. Outside, Luke had abandoned his trucks and was now drawing with chalk on their small concrete path. Jack watched as his son carefully sketched what looked like 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. The afternoon passed slowly. Jack helped Luke with his homework, made dinner from the dwindling supplies in their pantry, and tried not to think about Patterson's offer. But the words kept coming back. "Surely you want what's best for your son." As evening settled in, Jack and Luke sat at their small kitchen table. Steam rose from bowls of simple pasta with marinara sauce, Luke's favorite. The boy swirled his fork through the noodles, humming a tune from his favorite cartoon. "Daddy?" Luke looked up, marinara sauce smeared on his chin. "Tommy at school said his dad saw us on TV." Jack nodded slowly, passing his son a napkin. "Some people did take videos that day." He said, "You're really strong." Luke wiped his chin, missing most of the sauce. "Like Superman." Jack's chest tightened. He reached across the table and properly cleaned his son's face. "I'm not Superman, buddy. I just did what any dad would do." "But you lifted a whole car." Luke's eyes were wide with admiration. "That's why those people keep coming to our house, right? Because you're a superhero?" Jack set the napkin down, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, when people do something unusual, other people get very interested. They want to talk about it, make a big deal out of it, but that doesn't make it right." Luke tilted his head, confused. "Why not?" "Because what matters isn't being on TV or having people call you a hero." Jack reached out and ruffled his son's hair. "What matters is being there for the people you love, working hard and doing what's right, even when it's difficult." Luke nodded seriously, though Jack could tell he didn't fully understand. They finished their dinner in comfortable silence. The only sound, the soft clink of forks against bowls, and the distant hum of traffic outside. As Jack watched his son eat, Patterson's words echoed in his mind again. The bills would keep coming. The extra shifts would get harder. But looking at Luke's face, happy, trusting, unburdened by adult worries, Jack knew he'd made the right choice. His son needed more than money. He needed to learn about dignity, about self-reliance, about facing challenges head-on. Still, as they sat there in their small kitchen, under the flickering fluorescent light, Jack couldn't completely shake the weight that settled on his shoulders. The responsibility of his choice pressed down on him like a physical thing. He had turned down help that could have made their lives easier, at least for a while. Luke scraped the last bit of sauce from his bowl, then looked up at his father with a smile that made everything else fade away.
"Can we have ice cream?"
Jack glanced at the nearly empty freezer, knowing there was none.
"Not tonight, buddy. But how about we read that new library book instead?"
"The one about the dinosaurs?" Luke's face lit up, disappointment forgotten. "That's the one." As Luke bounced in his chair with excitement, Jack felt the familiar mix of love and guilt wash over him. He might not be able to give his son everything, but he could give him these quiet moments, this simple happiness, and the knowledge that his father would always be there, doing his best, no matter what. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jack's small front porch as he sorted through another pile of unopened letters. Most were from reporters wanting interviews or TV stations seeking exclusive rights to his story. He tossed them into the recycling bin without a second glance. A knock at the door made him freeze. Luke looked up from his coloring book at the kitchen table. Crayon paused mid-stroke.
"Stay there, buddy,"
Jack said quietly, moving toward the door. Through the window, he could see it wasn't another camera crew, just a woman in a neat business suit, holding a leather briefcase. Jack opened the door just enough to speak through the gap. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Donnelly, I'm Claire Williams." She smiled warmly, her brown eyes kind, but determined. "I'm an attorney working with Thomas Patterson. May I come in? I'd like to discuss something important with you." Jack's shoulders tensed. "Look, I already told Mr. Patterson." "Please," Claire interrupted gently. "Just 5 minutes of your time, that's all I'm asking." Something in her voice, perhaps its genuine concern, made Jack hesitate. After a moment, he reluctantly opened the door wider. Claire stepped inside, taking in the modest living room with its worn furniture and carefully mended curtains. Her eyes settled on Luke, who was watching them curiously from the kitchen. "Hello there," she said, giving him a friendly wave. Luke smiled shyly and went back to his coloring. "What's this about?" Jack asked, keeping his voice low. Claire set her briefcase on the coffee table and pulled out some papers. "I've been reviewing Luke's medical bills from the accident. The hospital sent over copies." "That's private information," Jack cut in sharply. "As legal counsel working with the community center's insurance, I have access to these records." Claire explained patiently. "Mr. Donnelly, these bills are substantial. Even with basic insurance coverage, you're looking at thousands in out-of-pocket expenses." Jack crossed his arms. "I can handle it." "No one's saying you can't," Claire said carefully. "But Mr. Patterson wants to help. He's prepared to cover all of Luke's medical expenses, no strings attached." "I don't need charity." Claire leaned forward slightly.
"It's not charity, Mr. Donnelly. It's assistance that you've more than earned.
What you did that day, saving your son, probably saving others who could have been hurt, that was extraordinary." "I did what any father would do," Jack said firmly. "Perhaps." Claire glanced at Luke again. "But not every father could actually lift a car. You did something remarkable, and people want to show their gratitude. Why won't you let them?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration building in his chest. "Because I don't want to be in anyone's debt. I don't want Luke growing up thinking we need handouts to survive." "Is that what you think this is?" Claire's voice was gentle, but firm. "A handout? Mr. Donnelly, accepting help when it's offered isn't a sign of weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing we can do." "You don't understand," Jack said, his voice growing tight. "Then help me understand," Claire pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, I see a father working himself to the bone, probably taking extra shifts to cover these bills, when there's a simple solution right in front of him." Jack's jaw clenched. "The solution is me working harder. That's what I've always done. That's what I'll keep doing." "And what happens if Luke needs follow-up care? What if there are complications? Claire's questions hit their mark, making Jack flinch. You're not just refusing help for yourself, you're refusing it for your son. Don't. Jack's voice was barely above a whisper, but the warning in it was clear. Don't try to use Luke to manipulate me. Claire sat back, sighing softly. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to help you see that there's nothing wrong with accepting support when it's offered freely. Dad? Luke's small voice came from the kitchen. Are you mad? Jack forced his expression to soften. No, buddy. Everything's fine, just grown-up talk. Claire gathered her papers slowly, tucking them back into her briefcase. Mr. Donnelly, I'll leave my card. Please think about what I've said. If not for yourself, then for Luke. Jack opened the front door, his movements stiff with barely contained frustration. Thank you for stopping by, Ms. Williams. But my answer is still no. Claire paused in the doorway, looking at him with a mix of sympathy and determination. This isn't over, Mr. Donnelly. Sometimes the hardest walls to break down are the ones we build ourselves. Goodbye, Ms. Williams, Jack said firmly, closing the door before she could respond. He stood there for a moment, one hand pressed against the door, trying to steady his breathing. Behind him, he could hear Luke's crayons scratching against paper, the familiar sound both comforting and somehow accusatory. Through the window, he watched Claire walk to her car, her shoulders straight but her steps slow, as if she was hoping he might call her back. He didn't. Instead, he turned away, pushing down the nagging voice in his head that wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had a point. The house creaked softly in the darkness as Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills illuminated by the dim light above. Luke's gentle breathing drifted from the bedroom down the hall, a reminder of everything Jack had to protect. He picked up one of the medical bills, the numbers swimming before his tired eyes. $3,000 for the emergency room visit, $2,000 for the x-rays, another $1,000 for follow-up care. The amounts kept climbing, forming a mountain he wasn't sure how to climb. Jack rubbed his calloused hands over his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath his fingers. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each moment of his solitude. It was nearly midnight, but sleep felt impossible with so many thoughts churning in his mind. Claire's words from earlier that day echoed in his head. Let us help you, Jack. There's no shame in accepting support when you need it. He pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping quietly against the linoleum floor. Moving to the sink, he filled a glass with water and took a long drink. The tap's quiet gurgle seemed too loud in the silent house. Through the kitchen window, he could see the neighbor's porch light casting a yellow glow across their well-maintained lawn. The Hendersons had offered to watch Luke whenever he needed, but Jack had politely declined, just like he'd declined every other offer of help that had come his way. His chest tightened as he remembered Mr. Patterson's voice on the phone, kind but firm. This isn't charity, Mr. Donnelly. Consider it an investment in your son's future. Jack set the glass down harder than he intended, the sharp clink making him wince. He glanced toward Luke's room, but the steady rhythm of his son's breathing didn't change. Moving to the living room, Jack sank into his worn armchair. The springs creaked beneath him, familiar and comforting. This chair had been here through countless nights of holding a crying Luke, through bedtime stories and afternoon naps. It knew all his worries, all his doubts. The moonlight filtering through the thin curtains cast strange shadows on the wall. Jack's eyes drifted to the small collection of photos on the side table. Luke's school picture from last year showed his gap-toothed smile, his eyes bright with childhood joy. Next to it stood a photo of Sarah, Luke's mother, taken just months before the accident that took her away. Her smile seemed to mock Jack's stubbornness. "What would you do, Sarah?" he whispered into the darkness. "Would you tell me I'm being foolish?" The silence offered no answers. Jack leaned back, closing his eyes. The weight of single parenthood pressed down on his shoulders, heavier than any car he could lift. Physical strength meant nothing when faced with the complex challenges of raising a child alone. He thought about Luke's doctor appointment scheduled for next week. Another bill to add to the pile. Another reminder of how close they'd come to tragedy. His son had been lucky. No broken bones, just bruises and scrapes. But the what-ifs haunted Jack's dreams. From Luke's room came the soft sound of movement, sheets rustling, a quiet murmur. Jack held his breath, listening for signs of distress, but Luke settled back into sleep. Even in rest, Jack's guard never truly dropped. Every parent's instinct to protect ran bone deep, but his seemed to have transformed into something harder, more unyielding. The businessman's offer would solve so many problems. The medical bills would disappear. Luke could have new clothes instead of hand-me-downs. They could move to a better neighborhood, with better schools. All it would cost was Jack's pride. But pride wasn't what stopped him. Not really. It was fear. Fear that accepting help meant admitting he couldn't do it alone. Fear that once he opened that door, he'd never be able to close it again. Fear that Luke would see him differently, not as the strong, capable father he tried so hard to be, but as someone who needed to be rescued. Jack stood up, his joints protesting the movement after sitting so long. He walked down the hall, pausing at Luke's door. The nightlight cast a soft blue glow across his son's sleeping face. Luke lay sprawled across his bed, one arm hanging off the side. His favorite stuffed dinosaur clutched tight against his chest. The sight made Jack's throat tight. Everything he did, every decision he made, was for this little boy. But was pushing away help really what was best for Luke, or was it just what was easiest for Jack? He carefully tucked Luke's arm back onto the bed, pulling the blanket up to his shoulders. Luke stirred slightly but didn't wake, his face peaceful in sleep. Back in his own bedroom, Jack sat on the edge of his bed. The mattress was old, the springs protesting beneath him. Another thing that needed replacing. Another expense he couldn't afford. The list seemed endless sometimes. Claire's business card sat on his nightstand, where he'd tossed it earlier. The edges were slightly bent from being carried in his pocket all day. He picked it up, running his thumb over the embossed letters. Such a simple thing. Just a phone number and an offer of help. It shouldn't feel like such a momentous decision. Jack set the card back down and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The familiar cracks and water stains offered no answers to his questions. Sleep felt far away, but he knew he needed to try. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, another day of decisions, another day of trying to be everything Luke needed. As he closed his eyes, the tension in his shoulders refused to release. The weight of his choices, both made and unmade, pressed down on him like a physical presence. Sometimes being strong meant knowing when to bend, Sarah used to say. But Jack had never been good at bending. He'd rather break than show weakness. He rolled onto his side, punching his pillow into a more comfortable shape. Sleep would come eventually, but he knew his dreams would be filled with the same questions that plagued his waking hours. The right choice seemed impossible to find in the darkness of night. The morning sun hadn't yet risen when Jack's alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m. He rolled out of bed, his muscles aching from yesterday's work. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the heating system and Luke's soft breathing from the next room. Jack moved through his morning routine like a shadow, careful not to wake his son. He packed Luke's lunch, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, an apple, and the last granola bar from the box. A note went inside too. "Have a great day, buddy. Love, Dad." He'd been writing these notes every day since Luke started school, a small way to stay connected when he couldn't be there. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door would be over in 2 hours to get Luke ready for school. Jack hated leaving before his son woke up, but the early morning cleaning shift at the office building downtown paid better than his regular community center job. The drive to his first job was lonely in the pre-dawn darkness. Streetlights cast orange glows on empty sidewalks as Jack's old pickup truck rumbled through the quiet streets. He pulled into the parking garage of the Milton building at 5:15 a.m., right on time. "Morning, Jack," said Tommy, the security guard, as Jack signed in. "How's the boy doing?" "He's good. Thanks for asking." Jack grabbed his cleaning cart from the storage closet, loading it with supplies. The weight of the industrial vacuum cleaner reminded him of the medical bills waiting at home. For the next 3 hours, Jack moved methodically through the building's floors. Vacuum, dust, empty trash bins, wipe windows, clean bathrooms. His movements were efficient, practiced from years of experience. Each task brought him closer to paying off another bill. At 8:30 a.m., Jack rushed to his truck. He had 45 minutes to make it to his next job at Peterson's auto shop, where he cleaned the office and customer waiting area. The work was easier there, but the pay was lower. Still, every dollar counted. During his lunch break at 11:30 a.m., Jack called Mrs. Rodriguez.
"How was Luke this morning?"
"He ate his breakfast and got to school on time," she assured him. Such a good boy you're, Luke. But Jack, he asked again why you couldn't take him to school yourself. Jack's throat tightened. I know. Thank you for helping out. The afternoon brought him to the community center, his regular job. The familiar halls seemed longer today, his mop heavier. His shoulders ached as he cleaned the gym floors, remembering how he'd lifted that car just weeks ago. Somehow, that feat felt easier than this daily grind. Between tasks, Jack checked his phone. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez. Luke finished his homework. Having dinner with us. Take your time. Jack's heart squeezed. Another dinner missed. Another evening when someone else was watching his son. The guilt sat heavy in his stomach as he finished his shift. The sky had turned dark by the time Jack pulled into his driveway at 7:45 p.m. Light spilled from his living room window, and through it, he could see Luke sitting at the coffee table, papers spread around him. When Jack opened the door, Luke looked up from his math worksheet. Dad? Finally. His smile was bright, but there were worried creases around his young eyes. Can you help me? I don't understand this problem. Jack set down his keys and work bag, noting the eraser marks and crossed-out numbers on Luke's paper. How long had his son been struggling with this? He should have been here earlier. Should have been the one helping with homework instead of cleaning other people's spaces. Of course, buddy. Jack sat down on the floor next to Luke, ignoring the protest of his tired muscles. Let's take a look. Luke leaned against him, pointing to the math problem. Mrs. Rodriguez tried to help, but I still don't get it. His voice was small, uncertain. I wish you could help me with homework every day like Tommy's dad does. The words hit Jack like a physical blow. He looked at his son's face, saw the need there, the longing for more time together. All his extra work, all his determination to handle everything alone. Was it worth this cost? The medical bills would eventually get paid, but these moments with Luke, these chances to be there for his son, were slipping away. Jack pulled Luke closer, breathing in the familiar smell of his son's shampoo. I'm here now, he said softly, though the words felt inadequate. Let's figure this out together. They bent over the math problem, Jack pushing aside his exhaustion to focus on explaining multiplication to his son. But even as Luke began to understand, beginning to smile as the numbers finally made sense, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing at something far more important than paying bills. The stack of worksheets on the coffee table seemed to mock him, each one a reminder of all the times he hadn't been there, all the moments when his son had needed him, and he'd been cleaning someone else's building instead. His pride in handling everything alone suddenly felt hollow against the reality of Luke's lonely afternoons and uncertain eyes. The night crept in slowly through the windows of their small apartment. Jack sat on the edge of Luke's bed, pressing a cool washcloth against his son's forehead. Luke's cheeks were flushed, and his breathing came in short, uneven bursts. Dad? Luke's voice was barely a whisper. My throat hurts. I know, buddy. Jack checked his watch. 11:30 p.m. He should have been asleep hours ago, knowing he had the early shift tomorrow. Try to drink some more water. Luke took small sips from the glass Jack held to his lips. Some of the water dribbled down his chin, and Jack wiped it away with the sleeve of his worn work shirt. The medicine cabinet in their bathroom held only basic supplies, children's Tylenol, some Band-Aids, and cough syrup that was probably expired. The medicine isn't working, Luke complained, his small hand clutching his stuffed dinosaur tighter. Jack ran his fingers through his hair, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on his shoulders. Give it time, Luke. Sometimes these things take a while to kick in. The night dragged on. Every time Jack thought Luke had fallen asleep, another coughing fit would start, or he'd complain about feeling too hot or too cold. Jack's eyes burned from lack of sleep, and his back ached from sitting in the same position for hours. By 2 a.m., Luke's fever had finally broken, but Jack couldn't bring himself to leave his son's side. He watched the gentle rise and fall of Luke's chest, remembering nights like this when his wife was still alive. She'd always known exactly what to do, which medicine to give, when to call the doctor, how to make Luke comfortable. The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., startling Jack awake. He dozed off in the chair beside Luke's bed, his neck cramped at an awkward angle. Luke stirred, but didn't wake up. Jack stumbled through his morning routine, the lack of sleep making every movement feel like he was wading through molasses. The coffee maker gurgled and sputtered, producing a brew that was more bitter than usual, but Jack gulped it down anyway. Dad, Luke's voice came from the hallway. He stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, looking pale but better than last night. "You should be in bed," Jack said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Mrs. Martinez will be here soon to watch you, but I feel better now." Luke shuffled closer, dragging his dinosaur behind him. Jack checked his watch again. He was already running late. "Luke, please, just go back to bed. I don't have time for this right now." Luke's lower lip trembled, but he didn't move. "Can we go somewhere fun when you get home? Like the park, maybe?" "I have another shift after this one," Jack said, throwing his lunch into a paper bag. "You know that. But you always have another shift." Luke's voice was small, hurt. "Tommy's family is going to Disney World next month. Could we maybe—" "No," Jack cut him off, immediately regretting his harsh tone. "Luke, you know we can't afford things like that. Not right now." "But why not?" Luke persisted, clutching his dinosaur tighter. "Tommy says—" "I don't care what Tommy says," Jack snapped, slamming his coffee mug down harder than necessary. Coffee sloshed over the rim, creating a brown puddle on the counter. "We're not Tommy's family. We can't just go on vacation whenever we want. Now go back to bed." Luke stood frozen for a moment, his eyes wide and glistening with tears. Then he turned and ran back to his room, the sound of his door closing echoing through the quiet apartment. Jack leaned against the counter, closing his eyes. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming, mixing with his exhaustion to create a toxic cocktail of emotions. He wanted to go after Luke, to apologize, to explain why things were the way they were. But the clock on the wall showed 5:15 a.m. If he didn't leave now, he'd be late for his shift. He grabbed his keys and lunch, pausing outside Luke's door. "I'm leaving now," he called softly. "Mrs. Martinez will be here soon. Be good for her, okay?" There was no response from the other side of the door. Jack's hand hovered over the doorknob, wanting to go in, to make things right. But time was ticking away, and he couldn't afford to lose this job. With a heavy heart, he turned away and headed for the front door, the growing distance between him and his son feeling like a physical ache in his chest. As he locked up, he could hear Luke's muffled sniffles through the thin walls. Each sob was like a hammer blow to his heart, but he forced himself to walk away. The early morning air was cold against his face, hiding the moisture in his eyes as he hurried down the street toward another long day of work. The gulf between them had never felt wider, and Jack had no idea how to bridge it. His son needed more than just the basics. He needed time, attention, and the occasional joy that came from special moments together. But how could Jack provide that when he was barely keeping their heads above water? He walked faster, trying to outpace his thoughts, but they followed him like shadows in the pre-dawn light. The weight of being both mother and father, provider and protector, felt heavier than any physical burden he'd ever carried, even heavier than the car he'd lifted to save his son's life. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jack dragged the mop across the community center floor. His movements were slower than usual, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. The clock on the wall showed 9:45 p.m. He still had another hour before his shift ended. His arms ached from the repetitive motion. But it wasn't just physical tiredness weighing him down. The worry about Luke's fever, the stack of unpaid medical bills on his kitchen counter, and the constant struggle to keep everything together pressed heavily on his mind. The squeak of his mop against the tile echoed through the empty hallway. Jack paused to wipe the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, leaving a smudge of dirt across his skin. He hadn't slept properly in days, staying up to check on Luke through the night while still maintaining his regular work schedule. The sound of heels clicking against the floor made him look up. Claire Williams stood at the end of the hallway, her business suit a stark contrast to his worn janitor's uniform. Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't need this right now. "The center's closed," he said, continuing to mop without looking at her. "I know." Claire's voice was gentle. "I waited until your shift because I knew you wouldn't talk to me otherwise." Jack dipped the mop into the bucket with more force than necessary, water sloshing over the sides. "There's nothing to talk about." Claire took a few steps closer, her expression concerned. "How's Luke doing?" The mention of his son made Jack's hands grip the mop handle tighter. "He's fine." "Really?" Claire crossed her arms. "Because Mrs. Thompson next door mentioned he's been sick." Jack stopped mopping, his frustration building. "You've been checking up on us?" "Someone has to," Claire said quietly. "You're running yourself into the ground, Jack." He resumed mopping, his strokes more aggressive now. I'm handling it. Are you? Claire moved to stand directly in his path. When was the last time you got a full night's sleep? When was the last time you ate a proper meal? Jack tried to move around her, but Claire wouldn't budge. This isn't your concern. It became my concern when I saw a good man destroying himself out of pride. Claire's voice carried a mix of frustration and compassion. Luke needs his father healthy and present, not exhausted and stressed. Jack leaned the mop against the wall, running a hand through his disheveled hair. You don't understand. Then help me understand, Claire said softly. Help me understand why you'd rather work yourself to death than accept help that's freely offered. The fluorescent light above them flickered, casting shadows across Jack's tired face. He looked down at his calloused hands, remembering how they had lifted that car to save Luke. Now they felt weak, trembling slightly from exhaustion. Jack's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I can't. Can't what? I can't be that person. The words came out barely above a whisper. The one who needs handouts. The one who can't take care of his own kid. Claire took a step closer. Accepting help doesn't make you weak, Jack. It makes you human. Jack's shoulders slumped, and he leaned against the wall. The facade he'd been maintaining for so long began to crack. Every morning, I look in the mirror and tell myself I can do this, that I can be enough for Luke, that I can give him everything he needs. His voice grew hoarse. But I'm scared. I'm so scared I'm failing him. Claire remained silent, letting him continue. Everyone calls me a hero because I lifted that car, Jack said, bitter disappointment evident in his voice. But what kind of hero can't even afford proper medicine for his sick kid? What kind of hero has to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries? He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, not caring about how unprofessional it looked. My dad always said a man provides for his family. He takes care of his own. The moment I take your money or Mr. Patterson's help, I'm admitting I couldn't do it. That I failed. Claire sat down next to him, careful to maintain some distance. You know what I see when I look at you, Jack? I see a father who works multiple jobs, who sacrifices everything for his son. I see someone who's so determined to be strong that he's forgotten it's okay to be vulnerable sometimes. Jack stared at his work boots, scuffed and worn from countless hours of labor. I don't want to lose myself. My self-respect. It's all I have left. Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. She didn't offer any immediate solutions or try to convince him further. Instead, she simply sat with him in the quiet hallway, sharing the weight of his confession. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking the minutes as they sat in silence. Jack felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter for having finally voiced his fears, but heavier with the reality of his situation laid bare. The squeak of the mop against the tile floor echoed through the empty community center when the click of heels made Jack pause. He knew those footsteps. Claire Williams stood in the doorway, her business suit a stark contrast to his worn janitor's uniform. Jack, she said softly, can we talk? He kept mopping, trying to ignore the gentle concern in her voice. Nothing to talk about, Ms. Williams. Claire stepped carefully around the wet floor, moving closer. I think there is. And please, call me Claire. We've known each other long enough now. Jack's hands tightened on the mop handle. I already told you my answer about the money. This is different, Claire said, pulling out a manila envelope from her leather briefcase. No strings attached. No media coverage. No connection to Mr. Patterson. Just help for Luke's medical bills. Jack stopped mopping but didn't turn around. His shoulders tensed as Claire continued. I've seen how hard you work, Jack. 3 jobs, barely sleeping, trying to be there for Luke while keeping everything together. You're not just hurting yourself anymore. The words hit home, making Jack's chest tighten. He thought about Luke's disappointed face when he'd had to miss his son's school play last week because of work. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Jack said, his voice rough. But I can handle this on my own. Claire moved into his line of sight, her expression earnest. Nobody's saying you can't, but should you have to? Luke needs his father present, not just providing. Jack's jaw clenched. You don't understand. Then help me understand, Claire pressed. Why is accepting help so terrible? Jack finally met her eyes, seeing genuine concern there. Because once you start depending on others, you can't stop. What happens when the help dries up? When people get tired of helping, I need to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. Jack, that's not my father, Jack cut in, surprising himself with the admission. He depended on others. Charity, handouts, whatever you want to call it. And every time the help stopped coming, we'd crash harder than before. I won't put Luke through that. Claire was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. This isn't charity, Jack. It's community. It's people who care wanting to help shoulder some of the burden. Jack turned back to his mop, needing the familiar motion to ground himself. The answer's still no. At least look at what's being offered, Claire said, holding out the envelope. No conditions, no expectations. Just help for a little boy who needs his dad. Jack's hand trembled slightly as he took the envelope. Inside were papers detailing coverage for all of Luke's medical expenses, past and future. The amount made his head spin. It was more money than he'd see in years of cleaning floors. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why do this? Claire's smile was gentle. Because sometimes the strongest thing we can do is accept help when we need it. Jack stared at the papers, feeling the weight of his pride warring with his desperate need to give Luke a better life. The memory of Luke's face this morning, pale and tired from his lingering illness, flashed through his mind. I can't, he said finally, holding the envelope back out to Claire. His voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry, but I just can't. Claire didn't take the envelope. Keep it. Think about it. This offer doesn't expire, Jack. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the tile. At the doorway, she paused. You know where to find me when you're ready. Jack stood alone in the empty community center, the envelope heavy in his hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he leaned against the mop handle, feeling the full weight of his decision pressing down on him. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photo on his lock screen. Luke's smiling face from happier times. His son deserved better than a father who was always working, always tired, always just barely keeping their heads above water. But every time he thought about accepting help, he remembered the shame in his own father's eyes when another handout dried up, the desperate scramble to make ends meet when the assistance vanished, the promises that things would get better, promises that never came true. Jack slipped the envelope into his back pocket, where it felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. He picked up his mop again, trying to lose himself in the familiar motion, but his mind kept circling back to the choice in front of him. On one side was his pride, the fierce independence that had gotten him through the hardest times of his life. On the other was his son's future, the chance to be more present, to give Luke the childhood he deserved. The weight of the envelope seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Jack's hands shook slightly as he continued to clean, his movements mechanical while his thoughts churned with indecision. He was trapped between what his pride demanded and what his heart knew his son needed. The harsh ring of Jack's cell phone cut through the quiet of the community center's empty hallway. He fished it from his pocket while balancing cleaning supplies in his other arm. The school's number flashed on the screen, making his heart skip a beat. Hello, this is Jack Donnelly. Mr. Donnelly, this is Mrs. Peterson from the nurse's office. Luke isn't feeling well. He's running a fever of 101.2, and school policy requires that he be picked up immediately. Jack's throat tightened. I'll be right there. He hung up and dropped the cleaning supplies, not bothering to put them away properly. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridor as he rushed to clock out. The drive to school felt endless. Every red light seemed to last forever, and Jack's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. The morning sun blazed through the windshield, but he felt cold inside. He couldn't afford to miss work again. The bills were piling up, and Luke's medical expenses from the accident still weren't fully paid. When Jack arrived at the school office, Luke sat hunched in a plastic chair, his usually bright face flushed and tired. His Superman backpack hung limply from one shoulder, and his brown hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. Daddy, Luke said weakly, reaching out his arms. Jack's heart crumbled as he scooped up his son. Luke's small body radiated heat through his thin t-shirt. I've got you, buddy. We're going home. Mrs. Peterson handed Jack a form to sign. He should stay home until he's fever-free for 24 hours without medication. Jack's stomach twisted. 24 hours meant at least 2 missed shifts. He scribbled his signature on the paper, trying to keep his hands steady. The drive home was quiet except for Luke's shallow breathing. In the rearview mirror, Jack could see his son's eyes were closed, his head resting against the window. The sight reminded him painfully of the day of the accident, when Luke had been so still beneath that car. At home, Jack carried Luke to his bedroom, carefully laying him on the superhero sheets they'd picked out together at a yard sale. He helped Luke change into pajamas, noticing how his son's movements were slow and clumsy. "My head hurts, Dad," Luke mumbled as Jack tucked him in. "I know, buddy." Jack pressed his hand against Luke's forehead. The skin burned against his palm. He went to the bathroom and rummaged through the medicine cabinet, finding only an almost empty bottle of children's fever reducer. 2 doses left, maybe 3 if he was careful with the measurements. Back in Luke's room, Jack measured out the medicine with shaking hands. Luke took it without complaint, which worried Jack even more. Usually, there was at least a little fuss about the cherry flavor. "Try to get some sleep," Jack said, smoothing Luke's hair back from his forehead. "I'll be right here." Luke's eyes were already closing. "Don't go," he whispered. "I won't." Jack settled into the worn armchair beside Luke's bed, the same chair he'd sat in countless nights when Luke was younger. He pulled out his phone and typed out quick messages to his employers, explaining the situation. The responses came quickly, understanding words that did nothing to ease the knot in his stomach. Every hour of missed work was money they desperately needed. As the afternoon wore on, Luke drifted in and out of sleep. His cheeks grew redder, and his breathing became more labored. Jack kept checking his temperature, watching as the numbers on the digital thermometer crept higher. 101.5, 102.1, 102.4. The medicine wasn't helping enough. Jack pressed a cool washcloth to Luke's forehead, remembering how his wife used to do the same for him when he was sick. The memory hit him hard, her gentle hands, her soft voice telling him everything would be okay. He wished she were here now. She would know what to do. Luke stirred restlessly, kicking off his blanket only to start shivering moments later. Jack tucked him back in, his heart aching at how small and vulnerable his son looked. The bedroom walls, covered in Luke's drawings and school awards, seemed to close in around them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Luke's bed, Jack watched his son's chest rise and fall with each shallow breath. The fever showed no signs of breaking. The medicine bottle sat empty on the nightstand, a stark reminder of how unprepared he was for this. Luke's face contorted in discomfort, and a small whimper escaped his lips. "Mom," he murmured in his sleep. The word hit Jack like a physical blow. He reached out and took Luke's small hand in his, feeling the heat radiating from his son's skin. In that moment, sitting in the growing darkness of his son's bedroom, the weight of everything crashed down on him. He couldn't do this alone anymore. The truth of it settled in his chest, heavy and undeniable. His pride had become a wall, not a shield, and it was Luke who was suffering for it. Every extra shift he took, every offer of help he refused, every moment he spent trying to prove he could handle everything by himself, it all led to this moment, watching his son battle a fever with an empty medicine bottle, and a father who was running on empty. Jack looked at Luke's flushed face, at the beads of sweat on his forehead, at the way his small body trembled despite the blankets. His son needed more than just his father's determination. He needed proper care, regular checkups, a parent who wasn't stretched so thin he could barely keep his eyes open. In the dim light of Luke's bedroom, Jack finally admitted the truth to himself. He couldn't continue this way. His son deserved better than a father too proud to accept help when it was offered. The realization didn't come with a crash of thunder or a moment of clarity. It settled in quietly, like dust after a storm, as he watched his son struggle against the fever. Jack sat in his parked car outside Luke's school, his trembling fingers wrapped around his phone. The device felt heavy in his hands, like it carried the weight of all his pride and stubbornness. Through the windshield, he watched parents rushing in and out of the building, their faces tight with concern. There was some kind of bug going around. Luke's fever had spiked to 102 degrees. The school nurse had been clear. Luke needed to go home and possibly see a doctor. Jack's stomach churned at the thought of another medical bill. He'd already maxed out his credit cards paying for the injuries from the car accident. His thumb hovered over Claire's number in his contacts. He'd saved it reluctantly when she'd left her card, telling himself it was just in case of an emergency. Well, wasn't this exactly that kind of situation? The memory of their last conversation made him wince. She'd been so kind, so understanding, and he'd been difficult. That's what his mother would have called it. Difficult. Like a child refusing to take medicine that would make him better. "Come on, Donnelly," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't about you anymore." He glanced at the school building again. Luke was in there, probably feeling miserable, waiting for his dad to come get him. His son, who never complained about wearing hand-me-downs or eating budget meals, who never asked why they couldn't go to the movies like his friends did, or why they had to skip birthday parties because Dad had to work. Jack's vision blurred, and he blinked hard. The phone screen dimmed, then went dark. He pressed the power button, and Claire's number appeared again, mocking his indecision. A knock on his window made him jump. It was Mrs. Peterson, the school nurse, bundled up against the cold. Jack rolled down his window. "Mr. Donnelly? Luke's asking for you. His fever hasn't gone down." "I'll be right there," Jack said, his voice rough. The nurse nodded and hurried back inside. Jack watched her go, feeling the walls he'd built around himself starting to crack. He thought about the night he'd lifted that car. Everyone called him a hero, but what kind of hero let his pride stand in the way of his child's well-being? What kind of father chose his ego over his son's health? His phone lit up again as he shifted in his seat. A text message from his boss at his second job. "Need you to cover the evening shift tonight." The words blurred together as tears threatened to fall. He couldn't do it. He couldn't be in two places at once. Couldn't be both provider and caregiver. Couldn't keep pretending he had everything under control. The memory of Claire's words echoed in his mind. "Accepting help doesn't make you weak, Jack. It makes you human." Luke's pale face floated in his mind's eye. His son needed him to be a father more than he needed him to be a hero. Jack's hand shook as he pulled up Claire's number again. This time, he didn't hesitate. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring felt like an eternity. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, and his mouth went dry. What if she'd given up on him? What if she'd decided he wasn't worth the trouble? "Hello?" Claire's voice was clear and professional. Jack opened his mouth, but no words came out. His throat felt tight, constricted by years of saying, "I'm fine," when he wasn't, of refusing help when he desperately needed it. "Hello? Is anyone there? Claire?" His voice cracked on her name. It's Jack Donnelly." There was a pause, and Jack could hear papers shuffling in the background. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Jack, is everything okay?" "No," he admitted, and the word felt like breaking free from chains he'd wrapped around himself. "It's not okay. Luke's sick, and he had to stop, swallow hard. I can't do this alone anymore. I thought I could, but I can't, Jack." Claire's voice was gentle, understanding. "I need help," he whispered, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "I know I don't deserve it, after how I've acted, but—" "Stop right there," Claire interrupted firmly. "You do deserve help. Everyone does. Where are you right now?" "At Luke's school. He has a fever and they want me to take him to a doctor, but I can't miss another shift and the medical bills from the accident." "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Claire said without hesitation. "We'll figure this out together, okay?" Jack leaned his head against the steering wheel, feeling something inside him finally give way. It wasn't just relief. It was like taking the first full breath after being underwater for too long. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "You're welcome, Jack. And Jack, I'm proud of you for making this call. I know it wasn't easy." As Jack ended the call, he felt the weight on his shoulders shift. It wasn't gone, not completely, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't have to carry it alone. The morning sun cast long shadows through Jack's small living room as he paced back and forth, checking his watch every few minutes. Luke lay on the couch wrapped in a blanket, his cheeks still flushed with fever. The boy's breaths came in shallow bursts, making Jack's heart ache with worry. A gentle knock at the door made Jack freeze mid-step. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This was it. The moment he'd been dreading and needing in equal measure. When he opened the door, Claire stood there with a warm smile and a leather briefcase tucked under her arm. "Good morning, Jack," she said softly. Her voice carried none of the judgment he'd feared. Instead, he heard only genuine concern. "Thanks for coming," Jack managed, stepping aside to let her in. The words felt strange in his mouth, like speaking a foreign language. "Luke's on the couch." Claire's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she entered. She paused to wave at Luke, who managed a weak smile in return. "Hi there, buddy. Not feeling so great, huh? Luke shook his head, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. Jack gestured toward the kitchen table, where he'd cleared away the usual clutter of bills and homework papers. Claire sat down, placing her briefcase on the table with careful precision. Jack couldn't help but notice how out of place she looked in his modest kitchen, with her tailored suit and perfectly styled hair. "Before we start," Claire said, opening her briefcase, "I want you to know something, Jack. Asking for help doesn't make you any less of a father. If anything, it makes you a better one." Jack's throat tightened. He looked down at his hands, rough from years of manual labor. I've always handled things on my own." "I know," Claire said, pulling out several folders. "But sometimes, the strongest thing we can do is admit when we need support." She spread the papers across the table, creating neat piles. "I've already spoken with Mr. Patterson. He's more than happy to help with Luke's medical expenses, no strings attached." Jack's eyes widened at the stack of documents. "All of this is medical coverage forms, insurance paperwork, and some legal documents to ensure everything's properly handled." Claire pulled out a pen and placed it between them. "We'll go through everything together, step by step." For the next hour, Claire walked Jack through each document, explaining terms in simple language and pointing out important details. She showed him how the medical coverage would work, explaining how Luke could see specialists without Jack having to worry about the cost. "And here," Claire said, pointing to a section of text, "this guarantees that you maintain full custody and decision-making power for Luke's care. Nobody's trying to take control away from you, Jack. We just want to help make things easier." Jack found himself relaxing slightly as Claire continued her explanations. The legal jargon that had always intimidated him became clearer under her patient guidance. She had a way of breaking down complex information into digestible pieces that didn't make him feel stupid for asking questions. From the couch, Luke coughed, and Jack immediately turned to check on him. Claire noticed the worry in his eyes. "You know," she said gently, "with this coverage, you could take Luke to see Dr. Thompson at Children's Hospital. He's one of the best pediatricians in the state." Jack's attention snapped back to Claire. "The specialist you mentioned before?" She nodded. "I've already spoken with his office. They can see Luke next week if you're interested." The tension Jack had been carrying in his shoulders began to ease. For the first time in weeks, he could see a path forward that didn't involve choosing between paying bills and getting Luke the care he needed. "I don't know how to thank you," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. Claire shook her head. "You don't need to thank me. Just focus on taking care of Luke." She pulled out one last document. "This is the final form we need to sign. It's the official acceptance of medical assistance." Jack picked up the pen, its weight feeling different now, less like a burden and more like a key unlocking a door he'd kept shut for too long. He signed his name with steady hands. "There's one more thing," Claire said, reaching into her briefcase. She pulled out a business card and placed it in front of Jack. "This is my personal number. Day or night, if you need anything, and I mean anything, call me. You're not in this alone anymore." Jack picked up the card, running his thumb over the embossed letters. A lump formed in his throat as he realized that for the first time since losing his wife, someone was truly in his corner. Luke coughed again from the couch, and this time when Jack looked over, he felt something new. Hope. His son would get the care he needed. The crushing weight of medical bills wouldn't force Jack to work endless hours away from his boy. They had a chance at a better life, all because he'd finally found the courage to accept help. Claire began gathering the signed documents, organizing them with practiced efficiency.
"I'll file these today,"
she said, closing her briefcase. "By tomorrow, Luke will have full coverage. You can make that appointment with Dr. Thompson whenever you're ready." Jack walked her to the door, feeling lighter than he had in months. On the couch, Luke had drifted off to sleep, his breathing slightly easier than before. "Claire," Jack said as she stepped onto the porch, "I spent so long thinking I had to do everything alone. I was wrong." She smiled, warm and genuine. "That's what community is for, Jack. Sometimes being strong means knowing when to lean on others." As Claire walked to her car, Jack stood in the doorway, watching her leave. The morning sun felt warmer somehow, and the future, which had seemed so dark just yesterday, now held the promise of better days ahead. He closed the door softly and went to check on Luke, gently placing a hand on his son's forehead. The fever still burned, but for the first time in a long while, Jack didn't feel helpless against it. Help was coming, and he had finally learned to accept it. Jack sat at his kitchen table, staring at the pile of medical forms Claire had left behind. Each paper represented something he couldn't provide for Luke on his own. The morning light streamed through the window, highlighting the stack of bills he'd pushed aside to make room for Claire's documents. His hands trembled as he picked up one of the forms. The words blurred together as memories of his father's voice echoed in his head. A real man takes care of his own. He'd lived by those words since Luke was born, wearing them like armor. Now that armor felt more like chains. Luke's coughing from the other room snapped Jack back to reality. He found his son sitting up in bed, looking pale but better than yesterday. "Hey, buddy," Jack said, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Luke croaked, then looked at his father with worried eyes. "Dad, are you okay? You look sad." The simple observation from his 6-year-old son hit Jack like a punch to the gut. Even Luke could see through his facade. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just tired, that's all," he lied, but the words tasted bitter in his mouth. Luke reached out and put his small hand on Jack's arm. "Is it because of the papers Miss Claire brought? Tommy at school says sometimes grown-ups get worried about papers." Jack's throat tightened. Here was his son, sick in bed, trying to comfort him. What kind of father was he? He'd lifted a car to save Luke, but he couldn't swallow his pride to accept help when they needed it most. "Dad?" Luke's voice was small. "Remember when you helped me with my math homework? You said it's okay to ask for help when something's too hard." The innocent wisdom of his son's words broke something inside Jack. He stood up abruptly, mumbling about getting Luke some juice, and practically fled to the kitchen. His hands gripped the counter as he tried to steady his breathing. On the counter lay Claire's business card, and next to it, the crumpled note from Mr. Patterson with his phone number. Jack had kept it, though he'd told himself he would throw it away. His eyes moved between the two, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The memory of Claire's words from yesterday echoed in his mind. Sometimes being strong means knowing when to lean on others. But the thought of calling Mr. Patterson made his stomach churn. The businessman had offered help weeks ago, and Jack had shut him down cold. Jack glanced at the calendar hanging on the wall. Dr. Thompson's appointment was scheduled for next week. But the reality of walking into that fancy hospital, of accepting charity, made him feel small. What would the other parents think? What would the doctors say when they learned he couldn't provide for his son on his own? His reflection in the kitchen window caught his eye. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped. He barely recognized himself. Was this the father he wanted Luke to see? A man too proud to accept help? Too stubborn to put his son's needs before his own ego? With trembling fingers, Jack picked up Mr. Patterson's number. Each digit he dialed felt like admitting defeat, but Luke's words kept playing in his head. It's okay to ask for help when something's too hard. The phone rang 3 times before a warm voice answered. "Hello? Mr. Patterson?" Jack's voice cracked. "This is Jack Donnelly." There was a pause, and Jack almost hung up. Then Patterson spoke, his voice gentle. "Jack, I'm so glad you called. How are you and Luke doing?" The simple kindness in the question made Jack's eyes burn. I'm sorry about before. The way I acted when you offered to help." "Jack," Patterson interrupted softly, "there's nothing to apologize for. I understand pride. I understand wanting to stand on your own 2 feet. Jack swallowed hard. "I feel like I'm failing him. Like I'm not man enough to take care of my own son." "Can I tell you something, Jack?" Patterson's voice was firm but kind. "The day you lifted that car, everyone saw a hero. But what makes you a hero isn't your physical strength. It's your love for your son. Accepting help doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise." Jack sank into a kitchen chair, his free hand covering his eyes. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to accept help without feeling like a failure." "Nobody thinks less of you, Jack. Not me, not Claire, and certainly not Luke. You know what I see? I see a father who would move heaven and earth for his son. Sometimes that means lifting cars, and sometimes that means letting others help carry the load." A sob caught in Jack's throat. All the walls he'd built, all the defenses he'd maintained, began to crumble. "I'm scared," he whispered, admitting it for the first time. "I'm scared of not being enough for him." "I know," Patterson said gently. But you're not alone anymore. Let us help you be there for Luke. That's all any of us want." Through the kitchen doorway, Jack could see Luke in his bed, flipping through a picture book. His son looked up and smiled, waving at his father. In that moment, Jack felt something shift inside him, like a key turning in a rusty lock. "Thank you," Jack said, his voice steadier now, "for not giving up on us, even when I pushed you away." "That's what community is about, Jack. We're here whenever you're ready. No judgment, no strings attached. Just people helping people." For the first time in weeks, Jack felt the tight band around his chest loosen. The shame that had been his constant companion began to fade, replaced by something unfamiliar but warm. Hope. "Mr. Patterson?" "Yes, Jack. I think I'm ready to accept that help now." Jack was washing dishes when he heard the thud from Luke's room. The sound made his heart stop. He dropped the plate he was holding, not caring as it shattered on the kitchen floor. "Luke?" he called out, already moving. No answer came. He burst into his son's bedroom to find Luke sprawled on the carpet next to his bed, face flushed and breathing shallow. Jack fell to his knees beside him, gathering the small body in his arms. Luke's skin burned against his touch. "Luke, buddy, can you hear me?" Jack's voice cracked as he gently patted his son's cheek. Luke's eyes fluttered, but didn't open. "Come on, son. Wake up for me." Luke mumbled something incoherent, his head lolling against Jack's chest. The fever that had been bothering him for days had clearly taken a dangerous turn. Jack's hands trembled as he felt Luke's forehead. It was blazing hot. Without wasting another second, Jack scooped Luke up in his arms. He grabbed his car keys and Luke's favorite stuffed dinosaur from the bed, then rushed out the door. The evening air felt cool against his skin as he carefully placed Luke in the back seat, making sure he was secure. "Hold on, buddy," Jack whispered, his throat tight. "We're gonna get you help." The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and horns as Jack weaved through traffic. Every whimper from the back seat sent daggers through his heart. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Luke's chest rise and fall with labored breaths. "Daddy?" Luke's weak voice drifted from the back. "I'm right here, Luke. We're almost there. I don't feel good." "I know, buddy. I know." Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Just stay awake for me, okay? Talk to me about your dinosaur." But Luke had fallen silent again. Jack's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. When they finally reached the emergency room, Jack didn't even properly park the car. He jumped out, yanked open the back door, and gathered Luke in his arms. The boy felt like a rag doll, limp and burning hot. "Help!" Jack's voice boomed through the emergency room as he burst through the automatic doors. "My son needs help!" Nurses rushed forward with a gurney. Jack laid Luke down, his hands lingering on his son's small shoulders. A nurse was already taking Luke's temperature, while another fired questions at Jack. "How long has he been unconscious? What's his temperature been like? Any other symptoms? Is he on any medications?" Jack answered mechanically, his eyes never leaving Luke's face. The monitors they attached to Luke started beeping rapidly, and suddenly there was a flurry of activity around them, BP's dropping. One nurse called out, "Get him to pediatric ICU now." They started wheeling Luke away. Jack moved to follow, but a nurse held him back. "Sir, you need to stay here and fill out some paperwork. We'll take good care of your son." "No, I need to be with him." Jack tried to push past her, but more staff appeared to block his way. "Sir, please. The best thing you can do for Luke right now is let us do our job and give us his information." Jack stood there, watching helplessly as they took Luke through a set of double doors. His son disappeared from view, and Jack felt his legs go weak. He stumbled to a nearby chair and collapsed into it. A clipboard appeared in front of him. Forms, insurance information, medical history. The letters swam before his eyes. His hand shook so badly he could barely write. Time seemed to crawl. Jack filled out what he could, then paced the waiting room. Every time the doors opened, he jumped, hoping for news about Luke. But hours passed with only brief updates. They were running tests, trying to bring down his fever, monitoring his vitals. Around midnight, Claire showed up. Jack hadn't even remembered calling her, but apparently he had. "Jack?" She touched his arm gently. "How is he?" Jack shook his head, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. "They won't let me see him. They're running tests, but nobody will tell me anything concrete." Claire sat with him, her presence oddly comforting in the sterile hospital waiting room. She brought him coffee he didn't drink and made calls he couldn't focus on. The night stretched endlessly. At 2 a.m., they finally let him see Luke. His son lay in a hospital bed that seemed too big for him, connected to various machines that beeped steadily. Luke's favorite dinosaur sat on the bedside table, keeping watch. Jack pulled a chair close to the bed and took Luke's small hand in his. It was cooler now. They'd managed to bring down his fever, but still too warm. Dark circles shadowed Luke's eyes, and his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. "I'm sorry, buddy," Jack whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I didn't bring you in sooner. I should have." He trailed off, choking on the words. The machines continued their steady beeping in the darkness. Jack watched each rise and fall of Luke's chest, every twitch of his face. He counted the breaths, the beeps, anything to keep his mind from spiraling into panic. A nurse came in periodically to check Luke's vitals, making notes on a chart. She tried to assure Jack that Luke was stable, that they were doing everything they could, but the words felt hollow in the face of his son's stillness. Jack hadn't felt this helpless since the day of the accident with the car. Back then, at least he'd been able to do something, to lift that impossible weight and save his son. But now, sitting in the dim hospital room, watching Luke fight an invisible battle, Jack felt completely powerless. The night crawled by, marked only by the steady rhythm of machines and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Jack didn't move from his vigil, his hand never leaving Luke's. He watched the shadows shift across the walls as the night deepened, each minute feeling like an hour. His mind kept circling back to all the warning signs he'd ignored, all the times he'd told Luke to tough it out because they couldn't afford another doctor's visit. The guilt sat like a stone in his stomach, heavy and cold. The sky outside the window began to lighten, but Jack barely noticed. His world had shrunk to the size of this room, to the sound of his son's breathing and the warmth of the small hand in his. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the edge of Luke's bed, and waited. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft whoosh of the ventilation system. Morning light crept through the window blinds, casting thin stripes across Luke's small form on the bed. Jack sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair he'd occupied for the past 8 hours, his body aching but his eyes never leaving his son's face. Luke looked so small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and wrapped in crisp white sheets. His usually rosy cheeks were pale, but his breathing had steadied during the night. The fever that had spiked so suddenly yesterday evening had finally begun to respond to the medication. Jack rubbed his tired eyes, feeling the stubble on his chin. He couldn't remember the last time he'd shaved or had a proper meal. The events of the past 24 hours played through his mind like a blur. The frantic drive to the hospital, the emergency room nurses rushing Luke away, the endless waiting while doctors ran tests. But they hadn't been alone. Claire had arrived within minutes of his panicked phone call, taking charge of the paperwork and insurance forms while Jack focused solely on Luke. She'd stayed for hours, bringing coffee and making sure Jack ate something from the cafeteria. Even now, a half-finished cup of coffee she'd brought sat cooling on the windowsill. Mr. Patterson had also shown up, surprising Jack with his genuine concern. The businessman Jack had once viewed with suspicion had pulled strings to get Luke the best care available, making calls to ensure they had access to top specialists. He hadn't done it for publicity or recognition. There were no cameras, no press releases. He'd simply wanted to help. The night nurse, Sandra, poked her head in. "How's our patient doing?" she whispered, careful not to disturb Luke's rest. "His color's better," Jack replied softly. "Thank you for checking on him so often." Sandra smiled warmly as she checked Luke's vital signs. "That's what we're here for." She patted Jack's shoulder before leaving. Her small gestures of kindness throughout the night had meant more than she probably realized. Jack leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. His mind drifted to all the other people who had stepped up to help. The neighbor who'd brought Luke's favorite stuffed animal from home. The community center staff who'd covered his shifts without question. Even the hospital cafeteria worker who'd slipped him extra cookies with his coffee. The weight of his previous stubborn pride felt foolish now. He'd been so determined to handle everything alone, convinced that accepting help somehow made him less of a father. But sitting here in the quiet morning light, Jack could finally see how wrong he'd been. True strength wasn't in standing alone. It was in being humble enough to accept the support of others when you needed it. The people who had reached out weren't trying to diminish him or take away his role as Luke's father. They were simply extending their hands in genuine kindness, wanting to help lighten his load. A small movement caught his attention. Luke's fingers twitched slightly, and his eyelids fluttered. Jack leaned forward, heart speeding up as he watched his son's face. The boy's forehead creased slightly, and then his eyes opened just a crack. "Dad." Luke's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, buddy." Jack's throat felt tight as he gently took his son's hand. "I'm right here." Luke's fingers curled weakly around his father's. "My head hurts." "I know, son, but the doctors are making you better." Jack stroked Luke's hair with his free hand. "You're going to be okay." Luke's eyes closed again, but his breathing remained steady and even. The doctor had said this might happen. Brief moments of wakefulness as the fever broke. Each one was a good sign. Jack felt something warm and unfamiliar in his chest. Not just relief at Luke's improvement, but a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the doctors and nurses who had worked through the night. Gratitude for Claire's unwavering support, and Mr. Patterson's quiet generosity. Gratitude for every person who had shown them kindness, big and small. The morning sun grew stronger, filling the room with golden light. Luke's cheeks had a hint of healthy pink returning to them, and his forehead felt cooler under Jack's touch. The worst had passed, and they had made it through. Not because Jack had been strong enough on his own, but because others had been strong enough to help carry them. A smile tugged at Jack's lips as he watched his son's peaceful face. He squeezed Luke's hand gently, his heart full of thankfulness for all the hands that had helped them reach this moment. The automatic doors of the hospital slid open with a quiet hiss. Jack pushed Luke's wheelchair through them, even though his son had insisted he could walk. "Hospital policy," the nurse had said with a kind smile. The morning sun warmed their faces as they stepped outside, and Luke squinted up at his father. "Can we get ice cream?" Luke asked, his voice still a bit scratchy, but stronger than it had been days ago. Jack's throat tightened. Even after everything, his boy's first thought was about ice cream. "Sure thing, buddy. But first, we need to get you home and settled." Claire was waiting by her car in the parking lot, keys in hand. She'd insisted on driving them home, and for once, Jack hadn't argued. The past few days had taught him something about accepting help when it was offered with genuine care. "All set?" she asked, opening the back door. Jack helped Luke into the car, making sure he was buckled in securely. The boy's Superman pajamas, brought from home during his hospital stay, hung a little loose on his frame. Jack made a mental note to cook more of Luke's favorite meals once they got home. The drive was quiet, with Luke dozing in the back seat. Jack watched the familiar streets pass by, his mind wandering to the stack of papers Claire had shown him yesterday. Medical bills marked "paid in full" in bold red letters. Mr. Patterson had kept his word, handling everything through his foundation without any fanfare or conditions. "You're awfully quiet," Claire said, glancing at him as she turned onto their street. "Just thinking," Jack replied, his voice rough. "About everything. About how different things could have been if—" Claire nodded, understanding what he couldn't quite say. "You know, accepting help doesn't erase everything you've done for Luke. You're still the father who lifted a car to save him. You're still the man who works 3 jobs to give him a good life." They pulled up to Jack's small house. Someone had mowed the lawn while they were at the hospital, probably one of the neighbors. Another small kindness that made Jack's chest tight with gratitude. Inside, Jack settled Luke on the living room couch, tucking his favorite blanket around him. The house was clean, and there were groceries in the fridge. Claire's doing, he knew. She'd been quietly taking care of things while he focused on Luke at the hospital. "I made some soup yesterday," Claire said, heading to the kitchen. "Let me heat it up for both of you." Jack watched her move around his kitchen with easy familiarity, and something inside him shifted. The walls he'd built so carefully over the years weren't crumbling exactly, but maybe they were developing doors. "Mr. Patterson called this morning," Claire mentioned as she stirred the soup. "He wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." Jack sat at the kitchen table where he could still see Luke dozing on the couch. "I need to thank him properly. Both of you, actually." "Jack," Claire started, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me say this." He took a deep breath. "I've spent so long thinking that being strong meant doing everything alone, that accepting help somehow made me less of a father to Luke. But these past few days," he paused, gathering his thoughts. "These past few days showed me what real strength is." Claire set 2 bowls of soup on the table and sat down across from him. And what is it? It's knowing when to let others in. It's understanding that being there for Luke means more than just providing for him. It means being present, being healthy, being whole. Jack's voice wavered slightly. And sometimes, being whole means accepting help from people who care. From the living room came Luke's sleepy voice. Dad, can I have some soup too? Coming right up, buddy. Jack stood, but Claire was already ladling out another bowl. Together, they moved to the living room, settling around Luke with their soup. The boy's color was better, his eyes brighter as he carefully spooned the warm liquid into his mouth. This is really good, Luke said to Claire, then looked at his father.
Dad, can Claire teach you how to make it?
Jack laughed. Really laughed. For what felt like the first time in weeks. Yeah, I think that could be arranged. Later, after Luke had fallen asleep again and Claire was preparing to leave, Jack walked her to the door. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, reminding him of that evening at the community center that had started everything. I need to call Mr. Patterson, Jack said, standing in the doorway. But I wanted to thank you first. Not just for the help with the bills or taking care of things here, but for not giving up on me, even when I was too stubborn to see what was right in front of me. Claire smiled, her eyes warm. That's what friends are for, Jack. And you know what? Watching you learn to accept help has been its own kind of strength. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we can't do it all alone. Jack nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. The weight he'd carried for so long felt lighter somehow, shared among the people who had become his unexpected support system. I'll stop by tomorrow with some more soup, Claire said, stepping onto the porch. And Jack, I'm proud of you. Standing in the doorway, watching Claire drive away, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. He pulled out his phone and dialed Mr. Patterson's number. It was time to properly thank the man who had helped save not just his son's life, but perhaps his own as well. Inside, Luke stirred on the couch. Dad? Right here, buddy. Jack sat down beside him, running a gentle hand through his son's hair. Are we going to be okay now? Jack smiled, his heart full.
Yeah, Luke. We're going to be better than okay.
The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Jack flipped pancakes on the griddle. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't rushing to get to work. Claire had helped arrange some time off for him, insisting that he needed to focus on Luke's recovery. The sweet smell of maple syrup filled their small kitchen. Are those blueberry pancakes? Luke called from the living room, where he was sprawled on the couch with his favorite superhero blanket. You bet they are, buddy. Jack smiled, carefully arranging the pancakes on 2 plates. And guess what? I didn't burn them this time. Luke giggled, sitting up as Jack brought the plates over. That's because you're not trying to do laundry at the same time. Jack's heart warmed at his son's observation. He had been trying to do too many things at once for too long. Sitting down beside Luke, he watched as his son dug into the pancakes with enthusiasm. These are the best ever, Dad, Luke declared, maple syrup dripping down his chin. Jack grabbed a napkin and gently wiped his son's face. Hey, slow down there, champ. The pancakes aren't going anywhere. They ate together, talking about simple things. Luke's favorite cartoons, the birds outside their window, the new comic book Claire had brought him during his hospital stay. Jack realized how much he'd missed these ordinary moments with his son. After breakfast, they spent the morning building a fortress out of couch cushions and blankets. Jack crawled inside the makeshift structure, his large frame barely fitting, while Luke played the role of brave knight defending their castle. Dad? Luke said during a quiet moment. I like having you home. Jack's throat tightened. I like being home with you too, buddy. Are you still going to work all the time? Luke's voice was small, hesitant. Jack pulled his son close. No, things are going to be different now. Mr. Patterson offered me a better job at the community center. Fewer hours, better pay. And Claire helped make sure we'll be okay. I like Claire, Luke said, playing with the edge of his blanket. She's nice, and she makes you smile. Jack felt his cheeks warm. Yeah, she is nice. She's helped us a lot. They spent the afternoon working on Luke's model airplane kit, something they'd started months ago but never had time to finish. Jack marveled at his son's patience as they carefully glued each piece together, Luke's tongue sticking out in concentration. Remember what you told me about Mom? Luke asked suddenly, not looking up from the airplane wing he was holding. Jack's hands stilled. What about her? How she used to build model planes with you when you were little. That's right, Jack said softly. She loved doing projects like this. Do you think she'd be happy we're finishing it together? Jack blinked back tears. Yeah, buddy. She'd be really happy. As the afternoon stretched on, Jack suggested they head to the park. Luke's face lit up. They hadn't been there in weeks. They packed a simple picnic of sandwiches and fruit, and Jack made sure to bring Luke's favorite red ball. At the park, Jack watched as Luke ran around with boundless energy, his recent illness seemingly forgotten. The grass was green and soft beneath their feet, and the spring air carried the scent of blooming flowers. They found a spot under a large oak tree, spreading out their picnic blanket. Luke munched on his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, while Jack stretched out beside him, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. Dad? Luke said between bites. Yeah? Are we going to be okay now? Jack sat up, looking at his son's earnest face. We're going to be more than okay, buddy. We've got people looking out for us now. Sometimes, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes being strong means letting others help you. Luke nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense to him. Like when you needed help lifting that car? Jack shook his head, amazed at his son's simple wisdom. Exactly like that. I may have lifted that car by myself, but I couldn't have gotten through everything else without help from our friends. They spent the rest of the afternoon playing catch, Luke's laughter echoing across the park. Jack found himself laughing too, really laughing, for what felt like the first time in years. He watched his son running after the ball, his small figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun, and felt a profound sense of peace. When Luke returned with the ball, slightly out of breath but grinning, he flopped down next to his father. Can we do this again tomorrow? You bet we can, Jack said, ruffling his son's hair. We've got all the time in the world now. They lay back on the blanket, watching clouds drift across the sky. Luke pointed out shapes, a dragon, a spaceship, a giant cookie, while Jack listened, treasuring each moment. Hey, Dad. Luke rolled over to face him. What are we going to do next weekend? Well, Jack said, smiling at his son's eager face. I was thinking we could go to that new science museum Claire told us about. Would you like that? Luke's eyes widened with excitement. The one with the dinosaur bones? That's the one. And maybe we could start having pizza and movie nights every Friday. How does that sound? Can we invite Claire sometimes? Jack laughed softly. Sure, buddy. We can invite Claire sometimes. They stayed at the park until the afternoon light began to soften, their shadows growing longer on the grass. Luke's energy seemed endless as he chased butterflies and collected interesting rocks, bringing each one to show his father with pride. Jack watched his son, marveling at how resilient children could be. Just a few days ago, Luke had been in a hospital bed, and now here he was, full of life and joy. The weight that had been pressing on Jack's chest for so long felt lighter now, replaced by something warm and hopeful. As Luke ran back to him with yet another special rock, Jack caught him in a big hug, making his son giggle. I love you, buddy, he said softly. I love you too, Dad, Luke replied, wrapping his small arms around his father's neck. Can we stay a little longer? Jack looked at the peaceful park around them, at his son's happy face, and at the beautiful afternoon stretching before them. Of course we can, he said. We've got plenty of time. The community center was quiet in the late afternoon light. Jack sat on one of the metal folding chairs, watching as Luke played with building blocks in the corner of the room. Claire sat beside him, her legal pad forgotten on her lap as they talked. I kept thinking I had to do it all myself, Jack said, his voice soft but steady. Ever since Sarah died, it was just me and Luke. I convinced myself that asking for help meant I was failing him somehow. Claire nodded, her eyes gentle. That must have been an enormous burden to carry. It was. Jack ran a hand through his hair, remembering those endless nights of worry. You know what's funny? When I lifted that car to save Luke, I didn't think twice about it, but accepting help from others? He shook his head. That felt impossible. Pride can be like that, Claire said. It looks like strength on the surface, but sometimes it's just fear wearing a brave face. Jack watched Luke stack another block carefully on his tower. The boy's tongue poked out in concentration, reminding Jack so much of Sarah that his heart ached. I was terrified, he admitted. Not just of failing Luke, but of people seeing how scared I really was. Being a single parent isn't easy, Claire said, setting her legal pad aside completely. No one expects you to have all the answers. I did. Jack's laugh was quiet, tinged with self-awareness. I expected myself to be superhuman. Ironic, considering everyone thought I was some kind of hero for lifting that car. You were a hero, Claire corrected him. Not because you lifted the car, but because you finally learned to let others help you carry the weight. Jack turned to look at her. Really look at her. Claire had been there through it all. The stubborn rejections, the late-night hospital vigils, the gradual acceptance of help. She'd never given up on them, even when he'd given her every reason to walk away. You know what scared me the most? Jack's voice was barely above a whisper. The thought that if I accepted help, I'd somehow lose control of being Luke's father. Like I'd be admitting I wasn't good enough to take care of my own son. Claire's hand found his shoulder, a gentle touch that spoke volumes. Being a good father isn't about doing everything alone, Jack. It's about making sure your child has everything they need to thrive. Sometimes that means accepting help from others. Luke's tower of blocks crashed down, and he giggled, immediately starting to rebuild. Jack watched him, noting how much healthier and happier his son looked these days. The dark circles under Luke's eyes were gone, replaced by the natural glow of childhood. I see it now, Jack said. Every time I look at him, I see how wrong I was. He needs me to be present more than he needs me to be perfect. That's exactly it. Claire smiled. And you know what? The moment you started accepting help was when you really showed Luke what strength looks like. Jack raised an eyebrow. How do you figure that? Because now he knows that it's okay to need people. That asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Claire's words carried the weight of truth. You're teaching him something far more valuable than pride. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Luke play. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting the community center in warm, golden light. I never properly thanked you, Jack said finally, for not giving up on us, for seeing past all my stubbornness. You didn't have to thank me, Claire replied. I saw something in you worth fighting for. A father who would lift cars for his son deserved someone in his corner. Jack felt the familiar tightness in his chest. But this time it wasn't from stress or fear. It was gratitude, pure and simple. Still, thank you for everything, Luke called out from his corner, proud of his new tower. Dad, Claire, look what I built. They both turned to admire Luke's creation, and Jack felt Claire's presence beside him, steady, supportive, understanding. In that moment, he realized how far he'd come from the man who'd walked away from the cameras, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with mutual understanding and respect. They'd walked this path together, from resistance to acceptance, from pride to humility. And somehow, in helping Jack find his way, Claire had become more than just a lawyer offering assistance. She'd become a friend, a confidant, someone who understood the complex journey he'd been on. As the sun continued its slow descent, casting long shadows across the community center floor, Jack and Claire sat together, watching Luke play. No words were needed. They both knew the story they'd shared, of a man learning to accept help, of a father finding his way back to his son, and of the quiet strength it takes to admit when you can't do it alone. The community center's main hall looked different today. Gone were the usual scattered chairs and worn gym equipment. Instead, neat rows of folding chairs faced a small podium at the front. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, and a banner read, "Thank you, Jack Donnelly," in carefully painted letters. Jack stood in the back, tugging uncomfortably at his tie. He'd borrowed it from Mr. Patterson, who had insisted he wear something nice for the occasion. Luke, dressed in his Sunday best, bounced excitedly beside him. "Dad, look! They spelled your name right and everything." Luke pointed at the banner, beaming with pride. Claire appeared at Jack's side, wearing a simple blue dress. "You ready?" she asked softly. Jack shook his head. "Not really. All this fuss." He gestured at the decorated room. "It seems like too much." "It's not too much," Claire said firmly. "These people want to thank you, Jack. Not just for what you did that day with the car, but for showing them what real strength looks like." People began filing into the room, families from the neighborhood, kids from Luke's school, and workers from the community center. Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran the after-school program, carried a large covered dish that smelled like her famous enchiladas. Mr. Chen, from the corner store, brought his whole family. Even some of the reporters who had once camped outside Jack's house were there, but this time they kept a respectful distance. "Looks like a full house," Jack muttered, his hands fidgeting with his tie again. Claire reached up and straightened it for him. "Stop worrying. Just be yourself." The ceremony began with Mayor Thompson saying a few words about community spirit and heroism. Jack barely heard them, too focused on controlling his breathing and keeping his feet planted firmly on the ground. Luke held his hand, occasionally squeezing it when he sensed his father's nervousness. Mr. Patterson spoke next, but instead of talking about the car incident, he spoke about watching Jack work tirelessly at multiple jobs, never complaining, always putting his son first. "True heroism," he said, "isn't just about moments of extraordinary strength. It's about the quiet courage we show every day." Jack felt his throat tighten. He looked down at Luke, who was listening intently, his face glowing with admiration for his father. When it was Jack's turn to speak, he walked to the podium slowly, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet room. The speech he'd prepared seemed inadequate now, facing all these familiar faces. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "For a long time, I thought being strong meant standing alone. I thought asking for help meant I was weak." He paused, looking at Luke and Claire. "I was wrong." The room was silent, waiting. That day with the car, people called it extraordinary strength. But the real strength I found wasn't in lifting that car. It was in learning to let others help carry the weight. Jack's voice grew steadier as he continued. "This community, all of you, you showed me what real strength is. It's in the meals Mrs. Rodriguez brings when Luke is sick. It's in Mr. Chen extending credit at his store when times are tough. It's in Claire." He met her eyes across the room, showing me that it's okay to trust again. Luke beamed up at his father from the front row, and Jack felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. "So thank you," Jack concluded, "not for this ceremony, but for teaching me that being strong sometimes means being humble enough to accept help." The applause that followed was warm and genuine. As Jack stepped down from the podium, Luke rushed forward to hug him, nearly knocking him over. Jack lifted his son easily, this weight he knew how to carry. People came forward to shake his hand and pat his back. Mrs. Rodriguez insisted he take home 3 containers of enchiladas. Miss Chen pressed a small gift into Luke's hands, a model car that made both father and son laugh. Through it all, Claire stayed nearby, a steady presence that Jack found himself increasingly grateful for. When the crowd thinned slightly, she touched his arm gently. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Jack looked around the room at the banner, the food-laden tables, the familiar faces of his neighbors. He remembered the weight of that car, the terror of seeing Luke trapped, the crushing burden of trying to handle everything alone. But now, surrounded by his community, that weight felt lighter somehow. "I'm good," he said, and for the first time in a long while, he truly meant it. "Really good." Luke tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, Mrs. Rodriguez wants us to try her new tamales. She says they're even better than the enchiladas." Jack smiled, loosening his tie slightly. "Well, we better not keep her waiting then." As they moved through the crowd together, father, son, and Claire, Jack felt something settle in his chest. The recognition wasn't about that one moment of extraordinary strength anymore. It was about all the moments that came after, the choices to be humble, to accept help, to let others in. Those were the real acts of bravery. And for the first time, Jack felt truly at peace with them all. Jack sat in the community center's office, staring at the letter in his hands. His fingers trembled slightly as he read through it again, barely believing the words on the page. Mr. Patterson had offered him a position as the center's facility manager, a job that would mean regular hours, better pay, and most importantly, more time with Luke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jack leaned back in his chair, remembering all the late nights he'd spent here, mopping floors and worrying about bills. Now, those same floors held the promise of a different future. He glanced at his watch. It was almost time to pick up Luke from school. "Have you made a decision?" Claire asked, leaning against the doorframe. She'd been instrumental in arranging this opportunity, working with Mr. Patterson to create the position. Jack cleared his throat. fighting the old familiar urge to reject help. "It's more than I deserve." Claire stepped into the office, her expression soft but determined.
"That's not true, Jack. You've worked harder than anyone I know."
"This isn't charity. It's recognition of your dedication." Jack ran his hand through his hair, a habit he'd developed when processing difficult decisions. The past few months had taught him valuable lessons about pride and acceptance. He thought about Luke, about all the school events he'd missed, the bedtime stories left unread. The hours would be 9 to 5? He asked, though he'd already memorized every detail from the offer letter. Monday through Friday, Claire confirmed. No more night shifts, no more weekends. You'd oversee all maintenance staff and facility operations. Jack stood up and walked to the window, watching as parents picked up their children from the after-school program. He spotted Luke sitting on the steps, engrossed in a book. His son looked healthier now, the color back in his cheeks, his smile brighter. "I'd be responsible for the whole building?" Jack asked, turning back to Claire. She nodded. "You already know this place better than anyone. You know what needs fixing, what needs updating. Mr. Patterson wants someone who cares about this community, someone who understands its importance." Jack thought about all the families who relied on the center. Single parents who needed affordable childcare, elderly residents who came for exercise classes, teenagers who found a safe space after school. He'd watched their stories unfold while working his late shifts, had seen their struggles and triumph. "I won't let you down," Jack said finally, his voice firm. Claire's face broke into a warm smile. "You never have, Jack. The paperwork's ready whenever you are." Jack signed the documents with steady hands, each signature feeling like a step toward a better future. As he finished, he noticed Luke peering through the office window, curiosity written across his young face. "Come in, buddy," Jack called out. Luke bounded into the office, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders.
"Dad, Miss Claire, what's happening?"
Jack knelt down to Luke's level, something he'd been trying to do more often, both literally and figuratively. "How would you feel if I told you I got a new job? One where I could pick you up from school every day and be home for dinner?" Luke's eyes widened. "Every day? Really?" "Really," Jack confirmed, watching joy spread across his son's face. "And we can have breakfast together? And you can come to my school plays?" Jack pulled Luke into a tight hug, feeling the warmth of his son's small body against his chest. "All of that and more, buddy. No more missing the important stuff." Claire quietly excused herself, leaving father and son to their moment. Jack held Luke close, thinking about how far they'd come. The weight of his old pride felt distant now, replaced by something lighter. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just the simple joy of holding his son and knowing tomorrow would be better. "Dad?" Luke's voice was muffled against Jack's shirt. "Yeah? I'm proud of you." Those 4 simple words hit Jack harder than any praise he'd received for lifting that car. His son's pride meant more than any headline or accolade. He pulled back slightly, looking into Luke's eyes that held such trust and love. "Want to get some ice cream to celebrate?" Jack asked, standing up and taking Luke's hand. Luke bounced excitedly. "Can we get chocolate and vanilla swirl?" "Whatever you want, buddy." As they walked out of the office, Jack looked around the community center with new eyes. The scuffed floors and worn walls didn't look like signs of decay anymore. They looked like opportunities for improvement. He could already envision the changes he'd make, the ways he could help this place better serve its community. They stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight. Luke skipped alongside him, chattering about his day at school and what flavor toppings he wanted on his ice cream. Jack listened, really listened, to every word. No more checking his watch, calculating when he needed to leave for his next shift. No more exhausted nods and distracted responses. At the ice cream shop, they sat at a small table by the window. Luke had indeed ordered a chocolate and vanilla swirl with every topping available, while Jack stuck with a simple vanilla cone. He watched his son dig into the sugary mountain with unbridled enthusiasm, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. This was what mattered. These simple moments with his son, the luxury of time spent together, the ability to be present without the constant weight of worry pressing down on his shoulders. The new job wasn't just about better pay or regular hours. It was about reclaiming these precious moments he'd been missing. Luke looked up from his ice cream, his face smeared with chocolate. "Dad, is this our new normal?" Jack reached across the table with a napkin, gently wiping his son's face. "Yeah, buddy, this is our new normal." Luke beamed, and in that smile, Jack saw everything he'd ever needed to see. His son was happy, healthy, and secure. They had a future now that wasn't built on exhaustion and missed moments. Jack looked at Luke, really looked at him, and felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose flood through him. This was what strength really looked like. Not lifting cars or refusing help, but building a better life for his son. One simple moment at a time. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the sidewalk as Jack walked hand in hand with Luke toward the elementary school. The autumn air carried a crisp sweetness, and fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet. Jack noticed how Luke's backpack bounced with each step, decorated with superhero patches, a reminder of what everyone had called Jack months ago. "Dad," Luke said, his breath creating small clouds in the cool air. "Tommy asked me yesterday if you were really the guy who lifted the car." Jack squeezed his son's hand gently. "What did you tell him?" "I said you're stronger than that." Luke looked up at his father with bright eyes. "I told him you get up every morning to make me breakfast and help me with homework. That's way harder than lifting a car." Jack chuckled, his heart warming at his son's innocent wisdom. The media frenzy had long since died down, and life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The weight of his pride, which had once felt heavier than any car, had lifted from his shoulders. They passed the spot where the accident had happened. The wall had been repaired, and fresh flowers bloomed in newly installed planters. Claire's idea to transform the space into something beautiful. Jack no longer felt a knot in his stomach when he walked by. Instead, he felt grateful for the chain of events that had taught him so much. "Look, Dad." Luke pointed to a group of kids playing near the school entrance. "There's Miss Williams." Claire stood by the school gates, clipboard in hand, organizing a morning reading program she'd started for the children. She waved at them, her smile genuine and warm. Jack remembered how he'd once seen her as a threat to his independence, but now he understood she'd been an angel in disguise. "Good morning, you two," Claire called out. "Ready for another big day, Luke?" Luke nodded enthusiastically. "Dad's going to pick me up early today. We're getting ice cream." "That sounds wonderful," Claire said, winking at Jack. "Don't forget about the reading club this afternoon." "I won't." Luke hugged his father's legs tightly. "Love you, Dad." Jack knelt down and wrapped his arms around his son. "Love you too, buddy. Have a great day." As Luke ran off to join his friends, Jack stood watching him go. The morning sun caught the edges of his son's hair, creating a halo effect that reminded Jack of all the precious moments he'd almost missed by trying to do everything alone. "He's doing so well," Claire said, moving to stand beside Jack. "You both are." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I never thought accepting help would make me feel stronger, not weaker. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we can't do it all alone," Claire replied softly. They watched as Luke disappeared into the school building, laughing with his friends. Jack thought about how different things were now. His new position at the community center gave him weekends off and regular hours. He could attend Luke's school events, help with homework, and simply be present in ways that mattered most. "You know," Jack said, turning to Claire, "everyone called me a hero that day with the car. But I think I'm more of a hero now than I ever was then." Claire touched his arm gently. "Why's that?" "Because now I understand that being strong isn't about what you can lift or carry alone. It's about being there for the small moments, about showing up every day for the people you love." Jack looked at the school building where his son had disappeared. "It's about making breakfast and checking homework and saying, 'I love you,' even when you're tired." The morning bell rang, echoing across the schoolyard. Other parents began to disperse, heading off to their daily routines. But Jack stood there a moment longer, taking in the simple beauty of an ordinary morning. He thought about the medical bills that no longer kept him awake at night, thanks to the help he'd finally accepted. He thought about the community that had rallied around him and Luke, not because he was some superhuman hero, but because they cared. He thought about Claire, who had refused to give up on him, even when he tried his hardest to push her away. "The real acts of heroism," Jack said quietly, more to himself than to Claire, "happen in the moments nobody sees. They happen in the middle of the night, when your kid has a fever, or when you're tired but you read one more bedtime story anyway." Claire smiled, understanding in her eyes. "Those are the moments that matter most." Jack took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The weight of his past struggles had transformed into something lighter, something that felt like wisdom. He no longer needed to prove his worth through stubborn independence. His strength now came from knowing when to stand firm and when to lean on others. Looking at the school one last time, Jack felt a profound sense of peace. The man who had lifted a car to save his son still existed within him, but he had evolved into something far more valuable. A father who understood that true heroism lived in the quiet, everyday moments of love and care. He turned away from the school, ready to start his day at the community center. The morning sun warmed his face, and he could feel the promise of many more ordinary, beautiful mornings to come. In the end, it wasn't the extraordinary feat of strength that had made him a hero. It was learning to be present, to be vulnerable, and to love without reservation. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Donnelly, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.